study session for the City Council for the City of Wheat Ridge, Colorado for September the 21st, 2020. If the clerk would please note that all of our counselors are here in attendance. Thank you all, as is our clerk and our city manager and our attorney, Mr. Dahl. So thank you all for joining us, and other staff and the members of the public. Thank you all for being here. We have a good meeting on the schedule tonight. We have on our agenda race and equity in Wheat Ridge, and then our second item is the Wadsworth improvement update. We'll have staff reports and elected officials matters right after that. We're going to start our meeting, as we always do, with citizen comment on agenda items. This would be on our study session items 1 or 2. If you would keep your remarks to those, but also we will take comment on, we have a special meeting happening directly after this meeting, and we will take comment on any item on our special meeting agenda or on any other item not on the agenda. So it's pretty wide open. So I believe we have speakers on the, we'll have the opportunity if you want to raise your hand in the Zoom format, but we're going to go first. I understand we have speakers in our City Council chambers, and I will go to Council chambers.
Yes, Mayor, can you hear me?
Oh, I can hear you very much. Thank you, Ms.
So we do have some visitors tonight in City Council chambers, and we'll start with Diana Lopez with Elise St. Peter on deck. And I'm just going to remind everyone, please look at the webcam when you're speaking. Thank you.
Good, yes, please look at the webcam. And if you would please introduce yourself, give us your first name and your last name. If you would please spell your last name for the record and give us an address. Once you've introduced yourself, you'll have 3 minutes to speak, and our Mayor Pro Tem will be keeping time for you, so it'll appear on the screen. So if our first speaker is ready, please continue.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. My name is Diana Lopez. I am a retired teacher and a school principal and a 30-plus year resident of Wheat Ridge. I live in District 3. I'm here today to support the actions Wheat Ridge for Equity members are asking for. These are actions that are long overdue. However, we are not the only community grappling with these issues. They are issues that every community in America is looking at. When I think of senior management in Wheat Ridge, I really see no one that looks like me or has ever looked like me. I'm guessing the vacancy process in Wheat Ridge is pretty traditional in that a position is posted, applicants apply, the interview process begins, and a candidate is selected. But what outreach to diverse and minority businesses or groups to recruit qualified applicants occurs? And what steps are taken to ensure that our city workforce and our city council reflect our diverse community? When I think of the woman in Central Park who called the police to falsely report being in imminent danger from a black man, I also think of Wheat Ridge neighbors on Next Door, the neighborhood hub, and I see comments like, I just saw and reported a strange person walking down 32nd Avenue. He's wearing a hoodie. I think he's black and up to no good. I'm not sure why neighbors call police on a brown or black person walking down the street in Wheat Ridge, but I fortunately also see other neighbors who are now pushing back on those kinds of comments. But I wonder, how do our police see and react to those kinds of calls? When I think of Wheat Ridge High School, I think of experiences I've had professionally, and my immediate reaction is not, oh good, our students are going to receive protection in our schools. It's more like, how will this end well for our students of color? What's the likelihood that they will end up in the school-to-prison pipeline? Kids used to get suspended or have in-school consequences for issues like fighting. Now, some kids receive a ticket for bad behavior. They have to go to court. Their parents have to leave a job where they may not be getting paid time off to be there with their child. And now the student is in the system. How do we change that? We're a diverse community, and we are at a point in time when we have an opportunity to be leaders of equity and a more inclusive community. We can make a difference for all of our citizens. We have strong leadership in Wheat Ridge, and I know we can and will do the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Scheck, our next speaker, please.
Thank you. We have Elise St. Peter with Jazir Rankin Richards on deck.
My name is Elise St. Peter, speaking on behalf of Wheat Ridge for Equity, or in support of Wheat Ridge for Equity. And I reside at 6997 West 36th Avenue. I grew up going to Wheat Ridge High School as a transfer student and now live within the neighborhood. During my time at Wheat Ridge Senior High, there was very little diversity in residents, students, and educational staff. While attending Wheat Ridge, I experienced teachers who did not welcome or accept my diversity and background, but rather combated it and made me feel lesser because of it. Imagine the feeling of being rejected and outcast by adults who were supposed to be educating you. Conversely, I can also be on the racially ambiguous side, which allowed kids I went to school with feel more comfortable to be openly racist in their words and actions around me. Let that sink in for a little bit. Kids were being racist. To gain perspective, racism is a learned behavior and likely passed down in the household. I am now an adult, and those kids from high school are also adults, perhaps raising children of their own. As an adult, I have been met more directly with racism from these same classmates. Like myself, they also remained in and around Wheat Ridge, or have parents, family, and are friends within the city and with whom they visit. Because of my experiences, I do not feel comfortable, accepted, welcomed, or at home in Wheat Ridge. It is vital that the city council members of Wheat Ridge recognize that racism exists in our community. For that reason, there must be reflection, consideration, and action on how we can change, starting with the proper implementation of diversity and inclusion training for city staff. Once city council can acknowledge racism exists right in our own backyard, we can move forward and strengthen our community together as we encourage healing and progress. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Scheck, our next speaker.
Thank you, Mayor. We have Jasir Rankin Richards with Morgan Richards on deck.
Hello, Mayor and City Council. Okay. Hello, Mayor and City Council members. I am Jasir Rankin Richards. I live at 3255 Ames Street. I would like you all to proceed with these action items because I believe they are very important in Wheat Ridge. In the 2 years that I've lived in Wheat Ridge, I've experienced racism multiple times, including a time where I was harassed at my school bus stop by a man who claimed that I stole something from his grandson, and he called me the N-word. I believe these action items will help students of color and people of color feel safe in Wheat Ridge wherever they go. Thank you.
Thank you for coming tonight. Ms. Scheck, our next speaker.
Thank you, Mayor. We have Morgan Richards next, and then is there anybody else in chambers that wishes to speak tonight? And then, Mayor, we'll go to Mr. Ihor Figlis on Zoom.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening. Thank you, Mayor and City Council, and to everybody who's watching. I'm Morgan Richards, and I and my family started Wheat Ridge for Equity informally on June 7th, after the murder of George Floyd. You did some amazing and impressive and important work on June 22nd when you passed the resolution, and I am grateful for that, and we still have a lot of work to do. You heard from Diana, you heard from Elise, you heard from my son. These kind of acts of racist comments and actions take place every day in every space in our community. At King Soopers, at the park, walking down the street, at the library, at the hospital, in our schools. And yet we are agreeing tonight and asking you to step forward with us to help do this uncomfortable work. What has Wheat Ridge for Equity done? We've had 40 protests since June 7th. We've had 230 different residents and community members attend those. Some people have come out once, some have been to every single protest, and not just my family. And as of 6:20 tonight, we've counted 18,196 honks, waves, and thumbs up of support. We have also been flipped off. We have been called names. We have been told to go back to our country. And one of the worst was a fellow resident who, as we chanted Black Lives Matter, he stood in front of us, and we never engaged because we have respect for our community. He would chant back, "No, they don't." We've also leaned into doing some oh, I forgot one more thing. As we came closer to tonight, we had someone who lived down the street who specifically threatened my child and mentioned his size 10 white N-word shoes. And you know what I believe? I believe our community is better than that. That does not define Wheat Ridge. We define Wheat Ridge. And your discussion tonight will define our community and its future so that Diana, Elise, and Jasir and every single person who is marginalized in the city of Wheat Ridge feels safe in this community. That is the job of every community member. It is not one department of the city. I want to recognize this is really hard and uncomfortable work, and I believe in all of us to be collaborative in a partnership to be able to do this work. So I ask you again to please agree to our 3 action items so that we can start to do the foundational work to address the racism and bigotry in our own community, because we will be stronger for having done it. I thank you.
Thank you very much for coming tonight.
Thank you, Mayor. We have Ihor Figlis with Jesse on deck.
Mr. Figlis, please continue.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, sir, I can.
Okay, great. Thank you. Good evening. This is Ihor Figlis. I live at 9775 West 36th Avenue. My name is spelled Ihorfiglus. I would like to make a comment about communications and input of citizens of Wheat Ridge into all the processes that come before City Council. Essentially, there is no communication between City Council and the people. I mean, I have heard previously City Council members complain about working in a vacuum and so on, but essentially it's really kind of a vacuum of your own design, of your own device, because for somebody to come and speak before City Council at these sessions, there's no back and forth. There's no ideas about how a City Council person in your district thinks or reacts or whatever. There's no discussion. You get on and you got 3 minutes and somebody's waving a timer in your face, reminding you, that you're limited. I mean, and the forum itself really doesn't even require anybody that on the other end to listen, because it's just 3 minutes and you don't have to respond. You can just sit there and stare, and then when it's over, it's over. Where are the district meetings? Where is the interaction with the constituents of the district? The City Council needs to go out. There's a number of issues that are out here. Some of them talked about today. That really, I think the community at large would like to be involved in this. And going to a social platform like Facebook and Nextdoor really doesn't represent it. Even sometimes people would like to get onto one of those platforms. They would like to make a comment. They get shot down by somebody, who feels empowered to do it because they don't have to face them. And they can insult and criticize and everything else. And other people just use it for some kind of gossipy stuff, And so it's that those social medias really aren't a platform, a forum for this. The City Council needs to really reach out to the constituents to create the opportunities for discussion. I know that in years past, there was only one study session, and one Monday a month was devoted to district meetings. Try to do something like that. Make it regular, make it something that people can expect, that they can go to, they can attend, and really let them interact with their representatives and with City Council. City Council will get much better feedback and understand, what the citizens want rather than having individuals pushing certain agendas. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Scheck, our next speaker.
Thank you, Mayor. We have Jesse with Maki DeLiot on deck.
Hey, Jesse.
Hi, folks. Jesse Hill, 2995 Chase Street in Wheat Ridge. Thanks for really taking a lot of this, forefront on race and equality out there. We all have focuses at Wheat Ridge that we've been personally involved with, and probably seen some racial things out there. And focusing on the city, I think, is a good point, and one that some of you from council might have heard me in the past discuss is, things around the community development and zoning ordinances specifically. It's something I take passionately. Personally, I've been involved since 2013 around accessory dwelling units, and some might get tired of hearing about it, but we've, done a lot of work and holding meetings, and it keeps getting kicked off or kicked to a different group and plan. And I think this is, again, another opportunity for the city to really look at some of these, existing policies that literally came with the land. When you look at the deeds and the covenants that were originally done would have a racial tone, and how that continues through the current zone code process. So, I've gone to council, I've spoken about ADUs, the ones that exist, the families who live in them throughout Wheat Ridge, which a lot are from marginalized and minority communities, and the fear that they have because they're in that gray area of the code where the city and the police and code enforcement may or may not enforce their housing out there. And even through those discussions with the community, that I hear from myself a lot of a racial back undertones of fear from ADUs and in general, changes to the zoning code. Frequently you'll hear, and the questions asked around ADUs, well, maybe we can have it, but I really only want, many a times this is said in front of council and ever, but it's, well, we can have an ADU, or my neighbor can have an ADU, but they have to rent it to their own family member or someone there. And what that really is saying out there, which they might have a certain vision, but it's also, you're not seeing the minority who might move in with me into my ADU, or my neighbor who might get the neighborhood a little more diverse. When you're saying that, you're saying, I want the makeup and the community to be just how it is. And it's an unfortunate thing that, you might not see that way, but I gotta say, I see it that way when members bring that up. So it's, I really want council, it's in your court to kind of move forward paths like this of how we can address affordability. ADUs are a proven way how we can get the diversity out there. And I hope you can do that. It's a quality of life, issue to me, to bring in more people into Wheat Ridge and less exclusion. So that's what I've got. Thanks a lot, City Council members, and good discussion coming up here, and appreciate the time.
Okay. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. Ms. Scheck, our next speaker.
Thank you, Mayor. We have Maki DeLiot.
Hey, Maki DeLiot, please continue.
Good evening. My name is Maki DeLaet, DELAET, 11830 West 35th Avenue. I am here to voice my concern for the current issue as a racial and equity issue. Recent revelations show that the media coverage of George Floyd case in Minneapolis was not a result of police brutality. It became apparent that the issue was not one of racial discrimination, but one of non-compliance and violent response to the police attempt for his apprehension. Therefore, I respectfully voice my concern in using this incident as reason to implement racial and social equity in our city. Wheat Ridge continues to see an increase of people of different race, age, physical capability, social value, and creed. We, both as born and naturalized citizens of the United States, are already protected by its Constitution to be under the privilege of citizens with equal protection of the law. Since it is already illegal to kill, steal, or physically abuse others, I see the redundancy in addressing these by implementing yet another layer of regulations. It encourages everyone to judge each other and not promote working things out in a civil manner. It does not foster kindness and neighborly behavior towards each other. It is also pointless to urge the City Council to implement the formation of a task force under false perception. Efforts should be made instead in reminding each other to act with mutual respect and kindness and enforce the currently effective laws when needed. Training elected officials on race and equity does not solve anything, as they are not the source of problems. The focus and energy should be spent on reminding each citizen of their role and responsibility to do their part in taking care of their immediate neighbors to build a stronger community that stands up for each other. The elected officials are there to represent our collective voice, not to take care of us. As a non-white person, I do not rely on white people to acknowledge and tell me that my life matters, as I know very well it does, as well as all my neighbors. I also know that it is my responsibility as a citizen to work with my neighbors and to make positive contribution to my community and teach my children to do the same. It is time to look at our neighbors beyond the physical characteristics or their beliefs. I urge you to really look at the ways we can build each other up so we can come together to fight against disrespect and unkind behaviors and each find a way to make a positive impact. We are going through tough times. We need to work together as a community and show the rest of the country how we can get through this together. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Scheck, our next speaker.
Mayor, that's everyone that has their hand up to speak.
Okay. If you would like to speak under Citizens' Right to Speak, if you will raise your hand in the Zoom format or speak up. If you are not on that, I will recognize you and you may introduce yourself and speak.
Mr. Mayor, I would like to speak.
Okay, please introduce yourself and give us your address and you may speak.
My name is Odarka Siglus. My address is 10580 West 34th Avenue. And I'd like to speak first on the issue of Wadsworth and the budget issues. One of the proposals in the packet was to, it says that we don't have enough money to build the entire length of Wadsworth with the plan that was put forward. And so the proposal is to just build part of it and then leave the rest of it for an unknown period of time until more money is available. And right now, I don't think anybody can prognosticate as to when any more money would be available. It doesn't seem like it would be any time in the near future. So I think it makes so much more sense to live within our budget and modify the approach so that we can correct all of Wadsworth, correct as many problems on Wadsworth as we can all at the same time. It just really doesn't make any sense to make one segment Class A super duper and just leave the rest of it languishing. The other part is that when we were voting on 2E, I don't think that any of us were told or realized that this would result in businesses being pushed out of Wheat Ridge or that property would be taken by force through condemnation. And I find that very disturbing that we're now contemplating doing something that way. The buy-in from the community from the business community should have been determined before we proceeded with this plan. And I really do not agree with such a wholesale taking of property. And as to the task force, many of us it's a very personal issue for a lot of us, and many of us have experiences that are unique. I would like to know if this proposed task force will be inclusive or exclusive. Will you allow everybody who wants to participate in this task force, or will somebody decide whose perspective or opinion is more important than others and then appoint them to the task force? That to me is not equity. And then if you do appoint a task force, then who would decide? Well, actually, in any case, who's going to decide? Who's going to write the final report? Who's going to edit it? Who's going to decide what experiences and what issues are important enough to be presented in a report to City Council and which ones aren't. I think I really hope that you don't, I mean, a task force by itself can very easily become exclusionary and not inclusive. So please keep that in mind. Thank you.
Anyone else from the public who would like to speak under citizens' right to speak tonight on any item on the study session agenda or on our special meeting agenda? Okay, I don't hear anyone, so I want to thank all of our speakers for being here, and we will close our citizens' right to speak. And we will move to item number 1. This is race and equity in Wheat Ridge. Mr. Goff, do we have a staff presentation on this item?
We will, but first we will turn it over to council members Nasser Beck and Dozman. Both of those council members requested that this item come forward. As you remember, and as was mentioned this evening, on June 22nd, City Council did pass Resolution 35, which condemned racism and hate in all its forms. At the same time, there was some public comment that evening, and you've heard from those folks again this evening from the Wheat Ridge for Equity, and they did propose 3 actions that they would like City Council to discuss. So we've laid that out in a staff report to you and provided lots of different resources for you to read and learn about what other cities are doing and what our city is doing as an organization also to currently address race and equity issues in the city, in our organization. But first, we would like to turn it over to council members Nasser Beck and Dozman as they requested this item.
All right, Councilors Nasser Beck and Dozman. The floor is yours.
Val, would you like to start or?
Sure, I can start. Okay, great. Thanks. Thanks everyone for the report too. It was so thorough, and it's amazing to see what the city's already doing and where you've already started to take action. And I wanted to just take a moment and thank Marianne so much for all the work that you've put into this and putting together these resources and the information we're going to talk about. And then also, I wanted to thank Chief Murtha. I don't think he's here tonight, but he's just been an incredible partner in so many of these conversations. Oh, hey, there you are. And just showing up for our community in a way that is inclusive and ready to tackle this together. And we are just so lucky in Wheat Ridge that this is how the conversation has headed. You know, I know we've had what some people call like protests out there on a weekly basis on 38th, but they're not really protests. It's more of a showing that they support the work that we're committed to working on. So just thanks to the community, special shout out to Chief, and Marianne, thanks for all your work.
Thank you, Val. So I just first want to start by thanking everyone once again for the work that's going into this. And this has really been a topic, a theme that has been resonating through many communities and many organizations. The Colorado Municipal League has also been talking about this, and it seems as if there's a lot of things kind of going on, and I think that a way for us to collaborate with not only communities but also organizations and build on each other and really help each other out and trying to address these race and equity issues. I have always admired America and our foundation and our principles in which we are trying to move towards a more just system and a justice for all. And I think that this is a really great way for us to not only have a conversation that may be uncomfortable, but also do an internal review of ourselves, our biases, and some of the policies in which we could improve upon. So I I would really like for us to have a good conversation as to what the next steps are. How do we move forward? How do we broach these conversations within our community? And I again want to thank everybody for, not tiptoeing around this and trying to face this and tackle this issue head on. And I've always really appreciated our police department and our city staff in being at the forefront and actually, being ahead of the curve and implementing policies and doing a lot of training that, a lot of people are just now discussing about putting in place. And so we are just always been, top notch in that respect, and we continue to do so. I really appreciated seeing the CML bullet points for Wheat Ridge, and I sit there and I'm just like, oh my goodness, I love my community and how much we do in order to address these issues and have these conversations. So without further ado, I think we can open it up for discussion.
Thank you very much. Thank you for bringing this to council, and I will open it up for discussion about how we've got several items, on action items that I know that staff and our citizens would like to know how we would like to go forward on those. So is there anyone that would like to sort of get us going? Mr. Urban.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On September 14th, I had the opportunity to attend an event put on by the City and County of Denver. The title of the event was How to Be an Anti-Racist. And one of the presenters, Nita Mosby Tyler, presented a question that I had with respect to the trainings and the facilitation that would be going on under this task force. And the concern that she presented was this idea of fake equity, where without the right consultant or the right rubric or syllabus, we would be sort of entering into an arena of fake equity. So I guess one of my questions is understanding, how do we know we're choosing the right consultant or facilitator so that we're actually doing the good work that's being asked of us here and not doing something that is off, on a tangent or something. So how do we determine the right consultant or facilitator for this work?
Mr. Goff, you had a training the other day, I understand. Can you give us a little background on how that went and what sort of facilitator you had?
Yeah, and maybe Allie and Marianne and the chief too, if he wants to come up. But yeah, it's a great question, Councilmember Urban, and it's a very important one, and we're very conscious of that on the trainings that we're looking to do internally for city staff. I know the chief went and vetted a few different groups and people, and I'll let him speak to how he found the speaker we had, and maybe Allie can speak also to how we came across the speaker that's going to do a series of 3 trainings for city staff. But we've looked at numerous ones. Allie sat in on different trainings from different speakers, and it's like, oh, that's not going to work for Wheat Ridge. And so we vetted some, but if council wants to move forward, I think with a facilitator, consultant with training and for council, I think we get suggestions from you all and the community, and we vet those. And if council wants to vet them as a group also, maybe we bring them in for interviews even, and to see if they're the right fit. But Allie or Chief, do you have any comments on kind of what you've seen looking for these different speakers?
Yep. So thank you, Patrick. I just wanted to comment that our last speaker that Patrick sat in on was, Mr. Omar Montgomery. Thank you, Allie. I was looking in the wrong place. Omar Montgomery from the NAACP. And we reached out to him. We got a lot of feedback on him as a speaker and him as somebody that could really bridge the gaps in the police department. So we asked him, invited him to come in. He came in with one of his grad students, Jay, and we had a pretty good conversation with all of the leaders of the department. We could only fit 25 people in the room, but we were able to pack that room with some of our leadership, or all of our leadership actually, and have a pretty good dialogue with him. I actually spoke to him again today about some follow-up, so I wanted to just let the council know that we've taken up this charge, and we're not it's not one and done. We're continuing to interact. I asked him for advice on how he would see our group moving forward in the future, what he thought we might do and the questions we might ask ourselves to push ourselves forward even further from his perspective. I have my own perspective, but I think together we're making progress. So we're going to meet together to do a debrief on the meeting we had with the NAACP. We're looking at other outlets and some other trainings that we're doing, but that was the meeting we had with the NAACP and Mr. Omar Montgomery. We look forward to our meetings, with the executive command staff, with our meetings coming up this week and the following 3 weeks as well. And I'll let some of the other leadership talk about those. But we've certainly taken training to heart in this matter. A lot of bias-based training and racial sensitivity and things along those lines. And we've also updated our policies and some of our procedures. So we're working hard to try and get there. But that was Mr. Montgomery's speech, and I thought it was very fair and balanced towards the police department. So our officers really received it very well.
Thanks, Chief. And I can certainly speak to the city's plan for leadership and supervisory training, which begins tomorrow morning. So the HR team researched a number of different opportunities, and we landed on a 3-part series. It's a very deep dive into anti-racism and leadership, and sort of how. So this is geared for supervisory staff and above, and our city manager, directors, managers, and supervisors will be attending that, and it's the next 3 weeks. So it's a total of 6 hours. And this is designed to help us identify our own unconscious biases, and again, look at, contemplate that through the lens of leadership, and then anti-racism and allyship, so that we can sort of build this foundation. My thanks to the chief, who actually did vet several different facilitators that came our way, because we want to make sure that this is really important. This is not about checking a box. This is not one and done. What we're doing is laying a foundation, and we wanted to make sure that the person that we have is going to connect and resonate with sworn and civilian employees, and has some really good experience. So it has certainly taken some work, and we don't know. We'll start tomorrow, and if it's not the right fit, then we'll go in a different direction. But I think we're pretty confident that this is a good program for the supervisory staff.
Mr. Urban, I'm not sure if that answers your question or not, but I think it's always difficult to find the right fit that's going to work for 100% of everybody. But I think we would like to hear from council on what your expectations would be for a facilitator, what type of facilitator, what angle you would like them to focus on, and so that we can go out and try to find somebody for you.
Okay, some more discussion around those items. There's the facilitator, and then we've also, got a task force in sort of the recommendations and in the inquiry, and we would need to sort of see how we would staff that and how we would constitute that. Ms. Hoppy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to everybody who's worked on getting this to the table and to the document. And Marianne, thank you for putting together such a great comprehensive list of what we're already doing. But then I also really liked the ICMA Equity Inclusion Toolkit. And I had highlighted a piece in there that says, local governments must consider issues of equity and inclusion that go beyond race, ethnicity, and gender, and include variations in age, sexual orientation, ability, economic status, educational attainment, immigration levels, and community size. And I think that that is a really good way for us to think about how we want the task force to move forward, and if we form a task force tonight, and that keeping in mind we we want to be as inclusive as possible and make sure that all parts of our community are represented, but also realizing that it may take some work to do some outreach to get some people to come and be a part of the task force, because maybe they don't feel like their voice is important, or maybe they don't understand how this type of process works. And I thought that it was a good point that was made in one of the Wheat Ridge Speaks comments, that if we don't have a 100% inclusive task force at the very beginning, it's not a failure. And so I just want to put out there that this is going to be a work in progress. And it's not that we're going to get it completely right and get our gold medal right off the bat. But as long as we continue to do the work, then I think we're moving our community forward. And I also want to point out that once looking at this very long list of things that we're already doing as a city, maybe there aren't any huge major changes that the task force will come to us with. And that's okay too. It's okay. They don't have to go in there and say, well, we have to find 10 really huge issues to deal with. I think having it open and letting them know, hey, if you find a few minor tweaks and maybe one big thing or two big things, that's okay too. Like we can say, hey, that's great for us. Hey, we love our community, and even more reason for us to be proud of it. I support having equity and bias training for elected officials. I know that city staff is already doing that. I support creating an equity task force, and the way I see them moving forward would be a lot like the way the Sustainability Committee moved forward, in that once the task force was gathered, then they looked at, okay, how are we going to move this bus down the road? And let's look at what we have and what we don't have, come up with some low-hanging fruit and some long-term goals, and present those to council and see what our path forward is. And so I think it's important that while we keep in mind the statement I read from the ICMA Equity and Inclusion Toolkit, also that we in our memo had said that the task force will carry out a thorough review of city policies, services, and ordinances, as well as inequalities in the community systems and departments, and report recommendations, including ways in which success will be measured towards becoming a more inclusive and responsive community. And I think with both of those in mind, we will have a very successful task force. And so I just wanted to lend my support for that, and say thank you to everybody who has worked on this.
Thank you very much. Ms. Hulteen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to just echo the thanks of staff, and also really tremendous thanks for the members of our community who have really continued to stay focused and cohesive and working together, on an issue that we haven't really taken on before. And so there's a lot of messiness to it. I echo Councilmember Urban's questions about getting the right facilitator on board for this. It's incredibly important, and recognizing sort of the lack of diversity of people in this conversation. I really feel it's important that when we're looking at who that facilitator is, that facilitator is going to have to facilitate the group as well as facilitate the conversations in between like staff and elected officials. So I'd really like to make sure that we're working with members of our community who, are representative of, the people that we'd like to see ultimately serving on this, to help us pick a facilitator, because I'm increasingly aware of my own blind spots and my lack of understanding necessarily of what is needed for those conversations to be constructive. So I'd like us to, as we're looking at those facilitators, to make sure we're reaching out to our community partners who have more experience with that, to help give us some insights on those. And this is something I care a lot about, and I care the most about stepping as far back away from it as possible to give the space for the task force members to do their work in service of our city. I think we don't frequently seek out their voices. We allow them. I think we're doing more and more work to have the invitation on the table feel more welcoming, but things that are needed to actually reach out to communities that are disenfranchised, and they're especially hard to reach in Wheat Ridge because there's such a minority. We're just going to have to work that much harder. And so I'm committed to supporting whatever outreach and communication to make sure that when the task force applications open, that we are letting our community know that not just that they're welcome, but that they're valued and desired. And if we need to really come up with an outreach strategy that's important there, I care a lot about that. And I've thought a little bit about like what would constitute a good task force. I have a lot of background in organizational structure for like working groups, task force. And I think, 15 to 18 people is a sweet spot. And I think it would be important to have some representation from each district. But then I think it's really important that we have some at-large people who are able to, fill gaps that might not come through district appointees. And after listening to some speakers tonight, I think it's really, really important that we have some representatives from our schools on the task force, because we were hearing pretty specifically that this is an issue that is taking root with our youngest members of our community that are incredibly valuable to us. So I'd like us to consider inclusion of a couple people representing the schools on the task force. And with that, I think that the ask on the scope of the task force is pretty clear from Equity for Wheat Ridge. And I very much would like to see this move forward and support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Urban.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To come out to Councilmember Hulteen's last point regarding the schools, I did pick up on those public comments as well, and I do think that that's a priority concern for us. My issue there is that as a task force, and we're working through these different issues, I guess I'd like this task force to stay focused on what the city of Wheat Ridge itself can do as an organization to combat racism and understand the ordinances and the rules and procedures of the city and what issues we have internally. The concern I have there is if we begin to talk about what the schools are doing or not doing, that's a completely separate political entity away from the city of Wheat Ridge. And I'd be concerned about how those recommendations come out, and where we have a task force making recommendations of what the school can and cannot do or should not do. And that's something that we can encourage the school district to take efforts on their own to deal with this, but that sort of cross communication with a different political entity concerns me a little bit.
Thank you, Mr. Stites, and then Ms. Weaver.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I see where Zach is coming from with this last point. I do think, though, it is important to get that younger perspective, even from the city perspective. So growing up in the city, what that's like as a kid, that sort of thing. So not just for schools, but even parks, things like that. So I do think it's important to get that younger perspective on that. For the most of it, I again want to thank the staff and everybody that's worked on this, especially our community members who've been working very diligently on this. For the most part, I believe I agree mostly with what Ms. Hulteen put forward and Ms. Hoppy. I agree that we need to probably include some members of the community in defining who the person is or who the people are that are going to do that training for elected officials. I do have a question about whether or not we move forward. Can we require elected officials to do that training? Because it doesn't seem like we can, and I'm not saying that I want to get out, I'm just asking if that's a requirement or if that's something that they can jump into something with the staff. Because I do think it's important, whether you agree with it or not, it's important to find your blind spots and find out what you don't know, because we all think we know a lot. We're all adults, but there's a lot of stuff that we all don't know. So you don't know until you know. So that's important. And as far as the task force goes, I do want to see it being inclusive of as many people as possible. But having worked with a large group recently, it can get to a point where it can be too big and it can fracture. So finding that sweet spot of maybe less than 30 people or something like that, but I don't know what that is. Ms. Holteen said 15 to 18, something like that. That seems about right, as long as we're not cutting out too many people that want to be involved in that process. And I think that's it. So I support all three things moving forward as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stites. Ms. Weaver.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I too support all three of the initiatives. And I just also want to thank everyone for their hard work on this, and really echo what Councillor Hoppy said, just regarding, it's a first step and it's important to take that step, and it may not be perfect, but there's lots of room to keep moving forward with this. So I'm really excited that we're taking this step. So thank you, and I support all three.
Thank you. Go back to Mr. Urban.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So when we talk about the number of people participating in this, I would ask for a larger number than a smaller number to address that issue of inclusion. And I don't want to turn anybody away. At the same time, I think we can all recognize the lack of participation within our existing boards and commissions. And that has been an ongoing problem for us, irrespective of this given issue and the content of this task force. Citizen participation in government task force committees, commissions, boards in the city of Wheat Ridge could be better. And so one of the things that I think we need to keep in mind is that while there might be a lot of interest in participating in this task force, if we can encourage those that are participating in this to also consider applying for our boards and commissions, I think that would be a good way to actually bring equity into the city of Wheat Ridge government, because those are the boards and commissions where decisions are being made. And that, in my mind, is what equity is being at the table, making those decisions. And to that end, one of the mechanics that I was thinking of as far as how this task force comes together is that we would use our existing boards and commissions application form to solicit membership in this task force. And one of the benefits in my mind that application brings is that we're not looking at a person's color, creed, nationality, or city of origin for that matter, and wanting to, I personally wouldn't want us to look at this task force and say, okay, we have 3 people from this race, 3 people from this race, 3 people from this religion, 4 people from this religion. That's where I think we can get into some serious, Title VI issues and some other concerns. And if we're truly trying to make this inclusive, I think we could take a note from the way the city staff currently hires folks and remove the names from the applicants that are seeking to be on this task force in order to allow us to be blind to who's applying. And if we have a number between 19 and 30 members on this task force, I think that we would have a strong enough base to provide recommendations. But that would be my suggestion, is that we use the boards and commissions application and remove the names from the applicants.
Okay, Ms. Hoppy?
I just would like to ask Mr. Dahl, first off, I totally get Zach's, Councilmember Urban's point. I would also like to point out that our application for the boards and commissions needs work as it is. It really, it's like, put down your name and what district you live in and what do you want to do? Super. I mean, like, that's, what commission are you looking at? It doesn't ask anything about, so most people, not all, but most people have felt like, oh, I'm interested in this because I have a background in this, but not all the time. And so I really feel like that application could really use some work to start with. But my question for Mr. Dahl is, where is that line drawn, to Councilmember Urban's point of how can we draw that line so that we're on the right side of that, and also be able to gather some information, because I see the point of being inclusive, but then I'm afraid we're going to lose the point of diversity if we don't have any statistics to look at necessarily. So I just was wondering, where is that line, Mr. Dahl?
Well, Councilmember Urban makes a good point about being concerned about Title VI implications of saying, okay, list your ethnicity, list your religion, list, the other 5 other characteristics that honestly the city wants to make certain it gets a diversity of. And when you think about it, the 2 goals are kind of at cross purposes, aren't they? And that's why your question, I understand that. I spent a little time today looking at and trying to network a little bit what other cities are doing around just their board and commission process. And increasingly what I'm learning is that the cities are not asking for those identifiers and instead are emphasizing what is it that you can, questioning and asking, what is it that you believe you can offer? Here's the task of this particular board or commission. It is tasked with, in this case, the functions that council's been describing. What can you bring and what can you offer from your background, really allowing the individuals to decide what they want to disclose, as opposed to requiring, look, the gatekeeper issue here is you've got to disclose your ethnicity in order to be considered to be on the commission. And I see cities not doing that. And instead going the other direction, saying, what is it that you can bring to the table? I like the idea of implementing the city hiring policy of leaving names out while you're looking at the applicants. But you need to be very thoughtful, I think, about the questions so that you can draw the interest of people that you need. And those questions, I really agree with you, need to dig much deeper than the present forms do. That's the best answer I can do based upon a very short amount of research. I think we should be wary about some kind of a quota system related to ethnicity or any other trait. I just, while it emanates from a good place and a good a desire to make certain that underrepresented groups are in fact represented, it I think falls into a number of traps that I think we can better avoid and still get the proper result. So I'd like to continue that research, but working on the questionnaire and really challenging people to say what they can bring to the table, I think is the more effective means.
Ms. Hoppy?
Thank you. I just have a quick follow-up question, and I'm not trying to wordsmith the application tonight, but Mr. Dahl, if the application says something like Wheatridge is looking for members for a newly formed committee, so they're not commissioners, but it's a committee, a task force in equity and race in Wheatridge. These are the things that you would be doing, right? So it's like you're looking at city policy, blah, 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 blah. And we want to make sure that we are able to include, to have a large amount of diversity on this committee. What perspective can you bring to this committee, or is that still getting too far off the line? Is that getting too far over?
No, I think that's fine. I think it's appropriate to express to potential applicants, what exactly are you trying to accomplish here on this group? And the more you can explain what you're trying to accomplish, I think the more likely it will be that people will be more interested in telling you about themselves in a way that gets you the kind of diversity you're interested in. That line of inquiry, as you just described it, doesn't offend me. I think it's supportive of the goal.
Thank you.
Ms. Hutchinson.
Thank you, Mayor. I just have a couple questions. On page 2, Financial impact, it says none. So I think it does seem like there is some financial impact if you're going to be hiring a facilitator. Is that right?
Yeah, Councilmember Hutchison, yeah, it's a good point, good question. I think tonight's discussion, there's no financial impact until we get further direction on what you want to do. And we bring that back, we would obviously summarize what the financial impact is at that time. We want it further direction from City Council before we throw numbers out there, because we don't know what you want to do. So tonight's conversation, there is no financial impact, but yeah, if you decide to move forward, there definitely would be, could be.
And this task force, is this only going to be people who live in Wheat Ridge?
That is up to you guys. That's why we're having this discussion this evening. We'd like to hear from you on what you would like and or not like.
That's important. If this is about Wheat Ridge, I think the people should be living here, not from coming in from outside of Wheat Ridge to state what we need to do here. That's my point on that. Also, as far as the city goes with open applications, when somebody comes to fill out a job application, I'm seeing here that now the city is not asking for criminal history on the job application. I've got some concerns about that. We have a daycare, don't we, at the rec center? We have kids that play sports. They have coaches that are over the teams. I think it's very important to know, is somebody a sexual predator? Have they sold drugs? Have they had illegal guns? That's important information, and that's for safety. So I don't understand, why is that removed?
Sure, good question. Allie, would you like to address that?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Hutchinson. That's a great question. So the city still does conduct a full background check on its final candidates. And so there's quite a lot of evidence that suggests that this is part of what's called Ban the Box, a movement to make sure that we're not discriminating against people on a job application. So we let candidates know that a full background check is part of the requirement. But oftentimes, I think there's been a lot of work done around this. There's evidence that suggests that people who have served, potentially been charged or convicted were being excluded from being considered for positions that they're actually a very good fit for. So this is part of removing any bias as part of the job application, but there is still, the city of Wheat Ridge conducts a full background check on final candidates, and job offers are not made until it's clear that that person is eligible per our guidelines to serve in the role. It's strictly a way to eliminate bias in the initial application process.
Well, actually, it's an actual state law now, I believe, Mr. Dahl, is that correct? That we're not allowed to, as an employer, we can't ask those questions because of those reasons. But as Ms. Scheck said, we, of course, depending on the position, we do full backgrounds and checks depending on what role they have. So those criminal activities will show up if they have them once we do their checks.
I don't know. I think it depends on what the job is, because right off, I don't think it's removed from all applications. So
I think in Colorado, it's the law now. It's my understanding. Maybe, I don't know if it's just for public employment or.
Mr. Bell, do you have an opinion on there?
Yes, it's not a question I've had to look at in some time, but my recollection is that you are not permitted to ask the applicant for criminal history.
Right.
When you're ready to do a conditional offer of employment, where you're to the point of the final decision-making process, then you advise ahead of time that you will do a background check when you get to that point. And then, as Ms. Scheck says, you can take that information into account for the nature of the position, which can vary widely from a parks employee to an employee in the rec center at the daycare or whatever. And you're allowed to make those decisions then, and you're allowed to gain that information then and apply it. And that's the critical step.
Okay.
Yep, House Bill 1025 was approved last year.
Okay.
All right, I have another question. So this task force, by having this task force, do they need to be a member of this International City County Management Association? The ICMA? To use the toolkit or whatever, you know? This is the 100 pages that was given to us.
No, Ms. Hutchinson, that is just a resource that International City County Management Association puts out. ICMA is an international organization that it's the professional affiliation for city managers and anybody in the management of local government. So it's just a toolkit that provides different resources.
Okay, thank you.
And I have one comment to address on the residential requirement for the application. One of the things that we did for the Wheat Ridge 101 application that you may consider is that we asked, what is your relationship to Wheat Ridge? And that was something that allowed business owners who maybe lived outside of Wheat Ridge, or somebody who lived in Lakewood one block out but went to Wheat Ridge High School, people who are closely affiliated with Wheat Ridge, to give them the opportunity to kind of identify how they related to Wheat Ridge. So it's something to consider potentially.
Ms. Nosler-Beck. Ms. Nosler-Beck.
Sorry, I just saw Jerry raise his hand, so I thought that meant he got to go. I wanted to maybe get us going on a consensus to move forward on the equity and bias training. But I wanted to quickly ask the team what they thought about where and how the actual training should take place. Like, should it be within a study session or at a retreat? I don't think we really talked about that.
Okay. Mr. Dahl, I'm sorry, did you have your hand up and I missed it on the last?
Yes, I did. Just relative to eligibility for membership, I wanted to assure council, you will see in the city's charter that members of boards and commissions have to be residents of the city, residents of the district, because we largely on boards and commissions, the code and the charter require equal representation. That's why you have so many 8-member commissions and boards in the city. They require city residency and that they be registered electors. But many times over the years, I've been asked if that requirement applies to other kinds of groups, task forces, authorities, those kinds of other groups other than identified boards and commissions, which are largely actually identified in your code. Planning Commission, Board of Adjustment, we're all familiar with them. And I've consistently interpreted that to not apply to anything but boards and commissions, because that's the terminology, the charter, and the code. And so I'm anticipating that someone after today's discussion might find that charter reference and say, well, wait a minute, we can't have anyone. And the answer is this would be a task force. And in the past, you've had task forces of the mayors appointed various groups over the years that have reached out to business owners and other persons that were not registered electors or residents of the city. And you have the ability to do that. I want to make sure you do that to head off that question.
Ms. Hoppe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate that clarification, Attorney Dahl, thank you. And then to answer Councilwoman Nosler-Beck's question, I am comfortable with doing a study session or a retreat. I suppose it would just depend on the facilitator and the amount of time they would need for that opportunity. And I don't, and to Councilmember Stites' question earlier, and Mr. Goff or Mr. Dahl can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think that as elected officials we're not paid staff, so I don't think it would have to be mandatory. But I don't think legally they can mandate to the elected officials that they have to take the training. So I would be open for either, and I would be okay with leaving it open so that we could maybe find a facilitator, maybe look at some facilitators, and then as a group, we can make a consensus on which one we want.
Thank you, Mr. Urban.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Do we know what type of training that we're looking at? Is it implicit bias training or anti-racism training, or do we have any kind of framework or area of study that we're considering for this training?
Ms. Dozman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I would really like to urge us to lean on some of our partners in this kind of a situation, because CML and National League of Cities is doing a lot of work around this. They have names, they have facilitators, they have partners and organizations that they've already vetted and reached out to and have been doing this work for years. And so I really don't think that we necessarily need to reinvent the wheel here. I think that we have a lot of resources that we can look to in order to do that. And I personally would prefer a retreat. It seems a little bit more intimate and a little bit more of like a kind of a work session as opposed to a study session where we're having a little bit more of a discussion and back and forth. But that's just my opinion on that. So I would really like, and I do consent to moving this forward. And I know it can't be mandatory for elected officials, but I think that offering it, much like, the newly elected conferences that CML offers, it's an opportunity, it's a resource. It's not, mandatory, but I think it would be good.
Thank you. Mr. Hoff.
Yeah, and just to remind council, you don't have to go with this necessarily, but this is what the Wheat Ridge for Equity suggested: frequent and ongoing equity and bias training in order to understand and recognize patterns of thinking that perpetuate discrimination and mitigate personal biases. So that was their suggestion, but again, we're here this evening to ask what council would like to do. And if that's clear enough direction, that's something that we can, as Ms. Dozman suggested, we can work with NLC and CML and the community, Wheat Ridge for Equity, and maybe come up with a list of facilitators. And I don't know if maybe one or two council members wants to form a separate group to help find a facilitator, or you trust staff to bring maybe 3 forward and the whole council interviews them, or council or staff just finds one and brings it forward, and hopefully it works. So I think we have several different options there.
Ms. Northrup-Beck.
I would just say that I do like the idea of staff bringing some options forward, because I don't know about everybody else, but I do know quite a few facilitators that I think I might even have some kind of bias towards in terms of presenting to the group. And so I think that I really like Councilwoman Dozman's idea of reaching out to some of these organizations that are here to support us and have done some of the vetting that's necessary. And I'd also, I'm more than happy to share my options with Mary Ann so that those can be put into the mix, and also potentially reach out to Wheat Ridge for Equity. And I'm so sorry, my husband's watching football and it's really loud in the background. Sorry.
You're good. Ms. Hobby.
Councilmember Urban can go before me.
Didn't see his hand. Mr. Urban.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As far as the format for this, I would prefer that it be done in a study session format. The idea of a retreat, I think, is good, but we're already working towards having a retreat for our strategic planning session. And with respect to this being an intimate process, we are an elected body, and anytime we meet, that is a public meeting. And the fact that we're receiving this training, I think, would be helpful for those that are watching, or for residents that are curious about this process. If we have this training in a study session, I think that would be a more open and transparent way to do this. And I guess when we're talking about the facilitator, it's important to know that depending on the some facilitators might do well in a closed door setting with coworkers that are, dealing with particular issues. But as an elected body, that facilitation might look a little bit different because we are in a public meeting. We are open to maybe being recorded like this. I don't know if we'll be meeting in person at that point or not, but those would be some of my concerns. So that's why I would push towards a study session format for this.
Okay, Ms. Hoppy, you had yielded the floor. It's back to you.
Thank you. I was going to ask Councilwoman Nosler-Beck. She had started a consensus. So I was going to ask her if she would like to move forward with that.
Let's
Sure.
see. Yeah.
Thanks, Mayor. I'd like to ask for consensus. This is my first time doing this, so might need some help. But ask for consensus to have elected officials do, at a future study session, do a equity and implicit bias training. And I would like to ask that the staff take a look at some facilitators and present those and bring those forward to us, and then we can move forward.
Does that sound like a consensus and give you enough direction on, so we have consensus on that direction, Mr. Goff? Do you have?
Yep, I got it.
That's got that. And I know that Ms. Dozeman, and thank Ms. Dozeman and Ms. Nosler-Beck for bringing this forward. And thank, Wheat Ridge for Equity for being part of this process. And I hope they will continue to sort of inform our decisions on how we can kind of move forward on this, because it's a tough topic to grapple with. And, I think hopefully if we can encourage a wide variety of our members of the community to tell us about themselves and how they can bring value to our understanding of these issues, that may help inform how we develop a good group. So.
Mr.
Okay.
Mayor, would you like to also talk about the task force, get a consensus on a task force?
Yep. Is there, do we have Ms. Nosler-Beck?
Oh, I'm unmuted. All right. I would like to ask for a consensus to form a committee to address race and equity in Wheat Ridge for no more than 20 people, with 2 each for each district, the rest at large for the mayor to appoint, 4 at large, and each district appointed 1 at large. Staff to direct on an application and return to council with an application and plan to communicate to the community to get people to apply.
Could you, Ms. Nosler-Beck, could you repeat the breakdown? 20 people?
Yeah, so 20, no more than 20 people.
Okay.
With 2 for each district. The remainder at large. For the mayor to appoint 4 at large. And each district appointed 1 at large.
Okay. Perfect, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I have a question.
Yes, Mr. Urban.
Do we have a time frame for how long this task force would be convened, and when we would like to see a report from that task force?
Ms. Nosler-Beck and then Ms. Hoppy.
Ms. Hoppy can go first. She raised her hand.
Okay, Ms. Hoppy, go ahead.
I was just going to make a suggestion that, because I know that when people are signing up for things that they want to know how long they're in it for. And so I would make a suggestion that that it runs for at least a year. And, we can extend it at that point, but that way the people who apply know that they're in it for a year. And I would hope, a lot, like I said, with like the sustainability committee, they got together, they did some fast work. They brought it back to city council. So I don't necessarily want to say you have to bring us something by, November 30th or anything like that, but I would suggest maybe that we initially say an initial 1-year term with the possibility of extension, or we can reappoint or reapply people at the end of the year. But okay. I think it's a fair point that people will want to know how long they're going to be in for the run.
Sure. Ms. Holteen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree. It is helpful to know at the onset what the sort of what's being asked of you and what the commitment is. Typically, a task force is asked to do a specific thing and come forward with recommendations. So I feel like if what we're forming is a task force, it has a little bit more defined year. And if the task force ultimately has a recommendation for a more sustainable like advisory group, then that's evaluated at that time. But I feel like the task force is actually not quite that open-ended. I feel, I mean, I don't have enough experience doing this specific work, but it seems, past experience with what Sustainable Wheat Ridge did in a year and Dirt Task Force and NRS is perhaps a year from when they initiate their work, given that it's going to take some time from this point to get through application and appointment. And I think that's just fair to them to say this is a year-long commitment. And it's also helpful if we're going to be looking for facilitators and trying to get bids from facilitators on the work to have a better sense of the scope that this is going to be a 12-month like working task force that is going to come forward with recommendations to present to council. And again, if coming out of that is a more sustainable advisory group that then takes on, a different role that's more of a 2-year rolling term, I would fully support that. But I guess I'd like to see something a little bit more defined to get started with.
Okay, let's go with Ms. Hoppy and then Mr. Patrick.
I just was going to ask Councilwoman Nussler back to just add that to the end of her consensus that we all understand that we were thinking a year, and add that to the end of the consensus for when the mayor does call for consensus.
Great. So I'd like to ask for, in addition to what I asked for in consensus before, that I'd also like to ask for consensus that the task force would need to present their report after 1 year from the task force being initiated.
Okay, so your duration with a report. And Mr. Kirkpatrick, I believe I saw your hand in I would say the air, but it was in front of the screen.
That's all right. Point of information, Mr. Mayor. I need help with my arithmetic here. If each district is to appoint 2 members, the mayor is to appoint 4 at-large members, and each council district is to appoint 1 other at-large members. If I do the arithmetic correctly, that's 16 people, not 20.
I think it's 2 at large for each council district also.
Thank you.
Yeah, 2 at large, get you 8. 4 for the mayor's 12. 1 for each district's another 4.
2 for each district.
2 for each districts, okay.
So I'm confused because we have 2 members from each district and then 2 at large from each district. I'm not trying to argue with what you want to do. I'm just trying to understand it.
I think it was two appointed from each district, and then those district council members can also appoint 2 at large.
Okay, got it.
Is my understanding. Is that correct, Ms. Nosler-Beck?
Thank you very much.
Mr. Mayor, I have a clarification question too.
I was just doing math, so it looks right when you explained it that way, Patrick.
Okay.
Mr. Goff, then go ahead.
Councilmember Holteen mentioned a facilitator for the task force, and I haven't heard anybody else discuss that. We're going to have a facilitator or consultant for the training, but did council also want a facilitator for this committee task force?
Ms. Holteen.
Thank you. I thought that's what we had been discussing earlier, and maybe I didn't realize that discussion was tied towards facilitator for the council training. So if that discussion if I misplaced that discussion, I do feel it's important to have facilitation for this task force. This is really hard work, and a lot of very delicate conversations. And my work with this has never been without a skilled facilitator who really brings that in. So maybe it's maybe some of the work that is done doesn't include the facilitator, but I think, you know, to get started and to help the group come together, I think a facilitator will help make sure that this work is not frustrating and counterproductive. So I strongly recommend we look at a facilitator for the task force.
Thank you, Mr. Stites.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I 100% agree with Ms. Hulteen on this. Even during the initial stages of the NRS, when we had 26 people in the room and people disagreeing, it got fairly heated fairly quickly. So it was good to have somebody professional and somebody who doesn't necessarily have a dog in the fight to kind of step in and really moderate that. So I do think if this task force is going to be on target and doing what we need it to do, I do think some sort of professional facilitator is a good idea. Who is going to be the point person in the city staff to work with that task force? Would that be Mary Ann or would that be somebody else? Or
Mary Ann is smiling, so I guess that just
you got on hold.
We'll probably put Mary Ann Schilling on that, but we'll tag team it when needed.
Thank you. Ms. Dozman, it looked like I saw your hand up.
Yes, thank you. So I also agree with having a facilitator in the room, at least to initiate the beginning of the process. And Corey echoed some of my next follow-up question as far as like who from city staff or our city government was going to be in the room to kind of gauge the progress and what's being said and be able to kind of give that feedback and capture that really well.
Okay. Ms. Hoppy and Mr. Urban.
I was just going to ask if we could ask for a consensus for the things that Councilwoman Nosler-Beck has put forward, including with including the facilitator that's been discussed, and if we could find a consensus on this item.
Okay, before we just go to there, let me just go to Mr. Urban because he's in the queue. Mr. Urban.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Not to add too much more to this consensus, but what is it that we want the task force to do? So we've talked about the creation of it, who's going to facilitate it, but what is it that we are tasking the task force with?
Thank you, Mr. Urban. I was going to ask the same
question.
As I understand it, we're tasking the task force to carry out a thorough review of city policies, services, and ordinances, as well as inequalities in community systems and departments, report recommendations, including ways in which success will be measured towards becoming a more inclusive and responsive community.
And would that be reported to the city council for like, once they've done that review and those recommendations are made, is that something that is then handed to us, and what do we do with that?
Again, I feel like the model can be a lot like the way the Sustainability Committee did, where they do their review, they look at short-term and long-term goals, they some low-hanging fruit, they come back to City Council and say, hey, here are the things we've identified. Here are ways that we feel like we can measure success in these things. And, you know, much like we did with the Sustainability Committee, we said, yes, please move forward with this work, and thank you for your time to pull it together.
Okay, did that, okay, so we have a consensus direction, but maybe you can clarify, Ms. Nosler-Beck.
So here's my question. Do I need to include any of that into the additional consensus? Like, is it helpful for me to include that what the task force will be doing in their report?
Well, is the task force not going to sort of pick up from the literature that we've been looking at and come back with more recommendations for us? I mean, I think we're gonna at least get another look at this, hopefully a frequent look at it, and be a participant in the process. So it's sort of how we can move the process forward. That's kind of the elements that we're looking at now.
Okay, so in addition to the report for one-year term, then we will also have the task force report out to the city council on city policies, services and ordinances, as well as inequities in community systems and departments, and report recommendations back to council for us to move forward.
Okay, does that look like we have consensus on these items? If you're in favor of this consensus motion, please raise your hand. And looks like we have consensus to move forward on that. And Mr. Goff and Ms. Schilling, does that give you an idea? And you've heard the discussion, and you know, a lot of this is sort of asking how the community can help us grapple with these issues. But that hopefully will give you some direction to go out and get started.
It does. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much for bringing that forward, Ms. Nosler-Beck and Ms. Dozman. We are at the 8 o'clock hour. We've been at this for an hour and a half. We've got agenda item number 2 to come, but I'd like to take about a 8-minute recess if we can. So we've got another item on this agenda and some reports, and then we have a special meeting. So we'll be here by another 8 minutes. We'll take a break. Thank you. City Council study session for September 21st. We will go to agenda item 2A. And this is an update on the Wadsworth Improvement Project budget update. And I'll go, let's see, Mr. Goff, do we have a staff report on this item?
We do. Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. We are back in front of you tonight, City Council, to give you an update on the Wadsworth Improvement Project. Excuse me, as we noted we would be. We're very close to putting this project out to bid and as in close to final design. So we have an update both on the budget and as those numbers have changed that since we've got closer to design, and also an update on our progress on purchasing and acquiring the right-of-way that's needed for this project. So I'll turn it over to Ken Johnstone.
Thanks, Patrick, and good evening, Mayor and Council. Thanks for your time this evening. I know you've got a big agenda tonight, but we've got a pretty important update for you on the Wadsworth project that we appreciate your time for as well. We've got a few other people on the call that we'll lean on for specific things as well. Mark Westberg, who's the project manager and has been since the onset of this project back in 2014. Steve Wynn, our engineering manager, is on the call as well. And Greg Jameson with HDR, the consulting firm that's working with us on both design, and Greg's specialty is right-of-way acquisition. So he'll jump in more when we get into that second agenda item. In terms of the agenda, though, we really want to give you kind of a comprehensive picture of where we're at. And to that end, we have kind of one presentation, though the two study session memos that you have, the one, of course, is on this agenda item 2A, which is the budget update, and then the second one is the right-of-way acquisition update. So the way we've structured the presentation for tonight is to give you a little bit of a history and background. I think that probably is particularly important for some of the newer council members. Give you a snapshot of where we're at in terms of project status, and then jump into those more specific agenda items, that being the budget update and the right-of-way acquisition update. And we'll pause between those two presentations to give council an opportunity for questions and discussion. So in terms of that history, it probably goes back further than the 2007 that I'm indicating on the slide. I think the earliest document that I'm aware of that called for kind of a Wadsworth widening repurposing goes back to 1999, as I understand it. That was just prior to my time in the city. But in 2007, we adopted a sub-area plan for the Wadsworth corridor, really identifying Wadsworth as the city's town center, identifying a desire for a mixed use kind of medium density development characteristic to it. And most importantly, perhaps in terms of that planning document, desiring a high quality and multimodal street. We did a citywide comprehensive planning process in 2009, and that really just, I think, re-emphasized the desire for the Wadsworth corridor to be the city's town center. In 2011, City Council initiated a development of new mixed-use zoning districts, a series of different districts that would apply in different scales of areas in the city. And the city initiated the legislative rezoning at that time as well. We did a legislative rezoning, which is council initiated on 38th Avenue, and we did one on Wadsworth as well. So you, as a body at that time in 2011, rezoned the Wadsworth corridor to mixed use commercial. There wasn't what we called an opt-out process. So a handful, I think it was just maybe, I think two of the best of my recollection, could choose to not be part of that rezoning. But by and large, there was property owner support for that new zoning designation, and you did a legislative rezoning. In 2014, to keep moving forward the concept for a multimodal street, staff with council support applied for a DRCOG grant for federal transportation improvement program money. That's kind of the big pot of money that funds regional transportation projects in the Denver metro area and really throughout the country and state. And we were successful in receiving that grant. It's a very competitive process, but this project scored very well, in part because the city committed to somewhat of an overmatch. So we committed to more than the 20% minimum overmatch or minimum match, and as a result, scored quite high that year. I think we were first or second on the list of grants that were awarded that cycle. And then I just want to note that, over the last 10 years, really, we've seen a lot of reinvestment in this corridor from the private sector. Ultimately, we don't do planning. We don't pursue grant funding for road improvements unless we think that those investments and those efforts are aligning with the private sector's desire to reinvest in corridors and areas of the city. And we've been pleased to see that there have been a number of private redevelopments in the corridor over those years as well. In terms of project status, just going back a little bit, a few years back, we started after we were awarded the grant funding with what's called a PEL, fun acronyms in the transportation planning world. That stands for Planning and Environmental Linkages, essentially a preliminary environmental assessment. So we did that over the time period listed there, 2014, 2015. That then segued into the more formal, federally required environmental assessment process, which was initiated in April of 2016 with a consulting firm and progressed through June of last year. And then concurrent to that process, we really began the design process. So 2016 through 2018 started with conceptual plans, 18 through 19 and during the EA progressed to preliminary plans. And then May through June of this year, we've segued into final plans. Where we're at now in September of 2020 is we're just about to submit final construction plans for CDOT final sign-off to the tune of, I think, a week or two, Mark, that we would be submitting those plans?
Yeah, I've got a meeting with the consultant tomorrow morning, so I would anticipate that either later this week or sometime next week.
Okay, and as I mentioned previously, Greg is on the call in large part because he's been our lead with HDR on the right-of-way acquisition. So we've been working aggressively on the right-of-way acquisition. They've been under contract with us for some time, and we have 65 landowners that are impacted by the need for additional right-of-way. The vast majority of those are only partial acquisitions that leave them still with economically viable properties, but there are 3 properties where we have a full acquisition. Good news, 36 of those properties are either closed, we've acquired the property, or we have mutual agreements as to what the compensation should be. So we're making good progress on those, and we'll update you further on that. And then a little less than half, 29 that are still pending, that we're still in the negotiation phase. We're also at a critical juncture in terms of going to the DRCOG board, who awarded the initial $31.6 million in funding. They have a policy that basically requires you to spend their funds that they award in a timely manner. And if you don't, they have an ability to pull back those funds and put those towards other eligible projects that might be ready for construction. They have what they call a 3-strike policy. We've had 1 strike, which means we missed 1 deadline, not at all uncommon. We're coming up on a 2nd strike, which is not all that uncommon either. That's coming up soon. We were to have been out to bid. We're going to miss the date that we were to have been out to bid for the project. So we'll be in front of the DRCOG board on October 21st to explain where we're at, and we'll elaborate on that a little more. We're certainly optimistic that we'll be able to retain the funding, that extension will be granted, but that is another critical juncture in the process that's coming up quite soon. We anticipate being out to bid starting in December, and that process would go through the first part of March of 2021, and then could be under construction in the spring of next year, with that being, at least probably a close to 2-year construction timeframe. We need to fine tune that based on the current design and construction documents. So getting into the actual study session packets and agenda items, let's dive now into the budget with that background to give you some context. So the original funding estimate, the original budget dates back to 2014, so 6 years ago. From a budget perspective, we also have been securing additional funding really back since 2015 to the present. I think it was pretty well understood that we would likely need more money than that initial $31.6 million that DRCOG awarded, in no small part just to the fact that we knew that the environmental process, the design process, the bidding process, all the work that we've done over the last 6 years takes time, and with time means cost increases. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. So again, just to kind of put in context the budget history, the evolution of the budget, those 2014 numbers were what we call pre-conceptual budget. I mean, it was really just our best guess at that point in time based on, other similar projects. In 2015, as we start to get into the PEL process, we developed what would be called a conceptual plan budget, but those, again, are very conceptual plans. In 2018 and then 2020 is when we still start to really get our hands on what we think are more realistic and valid numbers. So that's the juncture that we're at and why we're having this conversation with you today. So that original DRCOG tip funding of 31.6, that's how it breaks down. There was only federal funding and city funding with our local match. There was no CDOT funding at that time. And you see how those costs were estimated to break down in terms of the environmental approvals, the design work, the right-of-way acquisition, and the construction. And from a kind of percentage standpoint, those breakdowns are probably remain pretty similar now to what they were then. Just some of the absolute numbers have gone up for all of those, and we'll talk about that in a moment. So the budget history, as I said, we've been seeking additional funding sources, and that's really been intended to kind of align with the cost estimates that we've had along the way. So in 2014, our initial pre-conceptual number was 32 million. In 2015, when we were in the PEL process, those estimates went up to 40 to 45 million. In 2017, when we were really at more of a preliminary design estimate, we were up to 50 million, so significantly higher. The right-of-way at that point was estimated to be about 50% higher, and construction about 75% higher. We went through a required value engineering process in 2018, and were able to get the project cost estimate down to 45 million. So that was good news. That said, the news we have today is that the total cost estimate at this juncture to complete the whole project would be 59.2 million. So how does that break down? The environmental work ended up costing $1.4 million. That's about a $700,000 increase. There's really two or three reasons for that. One was the change between the PEL in terms of the design approach. And we can get into the detail of that. But during the PEL, we were looking at a design approach that had multiple signalized intersections. And CDOT directed us in a very different way during the environmental assessment, resulting in the new intersection design that we have for 38th and 44th in the final environmental approvals. CDOT also, when we initiated the EA, defined a much broader scope of potential historic properties, and that required extensive, I think Mark could give you the number, but that was probably the bulk of that $700,000 increase in consulting fees. Was that amount, Mark? Does that sound about right?
Yeah, it was over $600,000 of that 700,000.
And then design has gone up by 1.2 million. In a similar way, we're ending up we had to kind of wiggle the design of the street and the sidewalks around several historic properties that were identified in the EA that weren't in the PEL. And then we also had kind of a last minute impact of having to design a noise wall adjacent to a multifamily property between 38th and 35th that requested a noise wall be installed kind of at the last minute, which is a expensive construction project, but it was also a fairly extensive design process. Right-of-way acquisition is probably our biggest cost increase at 8.6 million. And, we intuitively, I think, knew that was coming down the pike. It was hard to put a number to it until we had our right-of-way consultant on board to help us really get appraisals done and have a firm understanding of what that increase would be. But essentially, for better or worse, that's just mostly real estate inflation over the course of 6 years in a hot economy and a hot Denver real estate market. In a similar vein, our construction costs have gone up 17.2 million, and much of that is very much the same way. It's inflation. If you've followed construction inflation in Denver metro area, and really nationwide, whether it be materials or labor costs, both have gone up dramatically over the last 6 years, and that's the result. So that's where we're at on the construction budget. As I mentioned earlier, we've been aggressively seeking additional funding. So the total available funds available for the project have gone up from the 2014 figure of 32 million to 38 million in 2017. That was with a federal grant as well as a CDOT match. We also were able to negotiate with CDOT that they would basically defer some maintenance projects that they would have otherwise spent on the corridor and redirect those funds into our project. So you see the figures there for the overlay and the traffic signals that would be incorporated into our project. And then finally, we went after one more TIP application, so more Dr. Cog funding, and in 2018 got a total of 6.6 million in an additional TIP allocation that got us up to 45 million in what we thought we had available and do have available by and large. We did this graph, I guess, just to kind of illustrate that we were, watching this, and interestingly, the budget was tracking a little bit above the available funding for a while, which is why we kept going after additional funding sources. We actually hit a break-even point at the point where we had 45 million in funds available, and after the value engineering, thought we had a $45 million project, but that's not quite where we're at today. So currently we have, as listed there, $43 million in total funding. We can elaborate on why 43 is slightly different from 45, and we're proposing where we will be spending those funds. So obviously the environmental and design costs are largely spent. We're well down the road in acquiring right-of-way, and we can talk more about that. And what that leaves is 21.5 million in construction, which obviously is not the construction budget that we anticipate needing to build the entire project. So what we're proposing to do is to phase in the construction. And I guess in summary, where do we kind of, I've alluded to most of this, I think, in my comments, but the environmental approval process got extended. We had, as I said, the major change in the intersection design from PEL to environmental assessment, which ended up costing more. The additional historic analysis and mitigation. The right-of-way acquisition is obviously the biggest increase. 8.6 million in additional costs in that area based largely on real estate inflation. We do recommend that we continue, and we are continuing in right-of-way acquisitions and completing final design for the full corridor. And then where we think where we're at then is a phased approach for construction. And we think the logical phasing of that for a couple of reasons is from 41st north to I-70. And then, of course, we'll continue to do what we've been doing, which is seek additional funding. We don't have that available yet. We have some decent leads, not for the full $14 million, but we're actively pursuing a couple different pots of money that would start to fill those gaps. So we'll continue to do that. And this is a visual that depicts what that reduced scope of work for construction would look like. And I'll let Mark speak to this.
Yeah, so the sort of yellow thick brackets that are shown there, the one on the right is the northern limit of the project, which is basically the Clear Creek Bridge. That doesn't change. And the one on the left is basically where Wendy's and McDonald's is. We've done a cost estimate based on that stretch, and it turns out to be about $21.3 million that we think that is going to be right now. And we've got 21.5 we think available. So that fit pretty nicely. Maybe we have a little bit left over. The advantage of that is that on the west side from that point north, we've got 3 lanes of traffic and streetscape and sidewalk. And then actually a little bit south of that point, down to 39th Avenue, there's actually that 3rd lane in front of Wendy's that's there today that would then drop at 39th Avenue. So we'd actually have 3 lanes down to 39th. It just so happens at that location, as I was looking for logical stopping points for this thing, the proposed curb and the existing curb end up within about a foot to foot and a half of each other. So it became a really good logical stopping point from a constructability standpoint, but also from what it does for us as a project. On the east side, I show that 3 lanes in streetscape and sidewalk going all the way down to 38th Avenue, and that's due to the fact that from 38th up to in front of McDonald's, we've already got streetscape and sidewalk there. It's existing, and so we would build and match up with that there in front of McDonald's, and then we would leave that existing improvement heading south. So we actually get a little bit more of the function of the project all the way down to 38th Avenue, and so that's what we're looking at as a proposed project. The reason we're starting from the north and building south is that second Dr. Cog tip grant that we got in 2018 was for the northern portion of the project from 48th Avenue up to the Clear Creek Bridge. So if we don't do that stretch, we lose another $6.6 million. And so we thought it was prudent to start at the north and head south and get as far as we could. And right now we think Wendy's, McDonald's area is about where we land. So we're going to continue to look at that and refine that as we move forward. But that's what we think we can build with the $21.5 million that we've got right now.
So that's where we are at in regards to budget. This isn't a fun presentation to bring to council. I know we're excited to bring this whole project to the community to completion. It's just the reality of where we're at in terms of the construction budget at this point, and the history that we've tried to explain in terms of how we've gotten here. So we're here for questions, and then again, we have a second presentation that talks about where we're at in regards to our right-of-way acquisition.
Okay, well, thank you very much for the presentation. I tell you what, why don't you, I need to get people back on the screen. Got that done, good. So Mr. Urban first.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There was a mention of CDOT in reference to the inclusion of the CFIs as opposed to the straight intersections. Can you walk me through how it almost sounded as though it was CDOT's recommendation for the CFIs, and I understood that to be a City of Wheat Ridge recommendation?
Well, we are indeed the sponsor of the project, so it was a collaborative result that got to those CFIs. But the PEL had a different approach to traffic management in terms of quite a few new signals, which we thought had some pros from a local development standpoint, as well as some traffic advantages. But the CDOT, and I'll let Mark speak to this, but the traffic result in terms of the ability to move traffic through this corridor with the approach that was in the PEL versus what's in the CFIs was vastly improved by the CFI approach, which is obviously a CDOT priority to be able to, keep traffic moving. We also looked at things like traditional double left turns at the major intersections, those being 38th and 44th. And similarly, those performed less optimally than the CFI did from a traffic movement standpoint. But Mark, why don't you take it from there?
Yeah, so as Ken mentioned, the PEL had a host of traditional intersections in it, in particular 38th and 44th. And that was developed in collaboration with some CDOT staff, but apparently not all the right CDOT staff. And so as we neared the end of that process, they said, you know what, this isn't going to work. We can't accept this. We were at 95%. And so we all agreed to just finish the PEL and we'll deal with whatever happened with the issues that CDOT had with the design in there during the beginnings of the EA process. And that was the first 6 months of the EA, or 6 to 8 months of the EA, and about $100,000 of that additional cost was in okay, so what we had in the PEL, you guys aren't going to accept. Let's restart that process of selecting alternatives and figure out where we land. So it really wasn't something the city pushed. It wasn't something CDOT pushed. It was what came out of the process that you go through with the environmental assessment. The CFIs turned out to be the things, the way they're designed, to have the least impact on right of way and have the most impact on traffic. So that was what was selected. And so that's what's going on there with that, if that answers your question.
Well, I mean, it really doesn't, because the purpose of the PEL is to avoid costs like this and design changes in the process. And I've mentioned this on numerous occasions. The environmental assessment should be, for all intents and purposes, from a design perspective, a mirror image of the PEL. And CDOT did sign that, so it's a bit confusing that such a dramatic change and obviously cost would be an acceptable sort of amendment or postscript to the PEL. I'm very confused by that, because as we've gone along here, it was mentioned that yes, there was a change, but it wouldn't be that big of a change. But now it appears it was a significant cost. So that does continue to concern me.
I don't think the cost between doing the CFIs the way we're doing them, doing traditional intersections, is not substantially different. There's a couple of extra signal poles and things like that. So maybe the CFIs are costing $500,000 or maybe $1 million more or something like that, but it's not a substantial cost compared to what's going on. And with traditional intersections, the corridor didn't work in 2040 based on 2040 traffic. And so traditional intersections were not accepted during the EA process because they didn't provide what was needed for 2040. And so both CDOT and the Fed said that we're not going to accept a traditional intersection at these locations, the traditional intersection alternative, because the CFI alternative performs so much better. So that's the one that got selected, and that's what moved forward.
And I guess my only last question is for Jerry. Given the 2E ballot question indicates that construction from 35th to I-70, how does the 2E funding come into this with a two-phase project?
Well, so long as the funding is still used in that reach of Wadsworth, the fact that it's done in two phases doesn't contradict the ballot question. Is that what you were asking?
Well, I mean, if there is a phase 2, that would be for some portion of Wadsworth, south of 41st, as it were. But in the ballot question, it says Wadsworth reconstruction from 35th to I-70. So can we just spend that all in the first block? Or I guess when the ballot question says we must reconstruct Wadsworth from 35th to I-70, it seems like we're leaving that phase 2 off, and we're not really sure if that's ever going to get done.
The $7 million that came from the ballot question, Mr. Urban, has been spent already. We used those funds. Mark can explain, I think, on the right-of-way acquisition, right? On what we could. So we've already spent the $7 million that we received from the 2E ballot question. for the project. I get it. It's not getting the full construction project done in the first go, but Mark, how was the $7 million spent?
So the $7 million has been spent on our 20% local match for all the design environmental work, and we'll continue to do that through the end of this year. The remainder of that is pretty much all going to be spent on matching right-of-way costs, the local match for the right-of-way purchases, but also on the 3 full acquisitions, which are totaling almost, I think the number is $4.5 million for the 3 full acquisitions. We're using city money only to buy those because then the disposition of those properties just follows the city process. It doesn't have to follow the federal process. So we're essentially overmatching the right-of-way, and then we'll be using that CDOT funding that we're getting as the local match for the federal funds during construction. So that all, it just so happens the amount of money that we've got for 2E is really close to what we're getting from CDOT. And so we're able to do that. It's a little bit of a shell game, but it's an extremely legal and transparent shell game. We've talked with CDOT folks about doing it this way, and they're totally okay with this approach. We're essentially overmatching the entire project because all the CDOT money can be counted as local match because it's non-federal. So that's another $4 million plus that we've got sitting there. So hopefully that answers your question on that. But by the end of this year, if we get all the right-of-way acquired by the end of this year, we will have spent the entire $7 million.
I guess my question for Jerry then is, if we do not complete this project from the Wadsworth reconstruction from 35th Avenue to I-70, how does that impact if the 2E funds weren't used? How does that play out?
Well, the 2E funds are earmarked for that project. There's not a mandate in the ballot question. I haven't looked at the ballot question in a long time, but I'm pretty confident there's not a ballot mandate that says the project has to be completed for that amount, or that all the money that you can stop short of spending all the money. So long as whatever the city does with that money is spending it on that project in that reach, the fact that it's not spent in one phase and is spent in a later phase doesn't offend the ballot question.
Even if the project isn't completed?
Yeah, I don't think the ballot question, again, it's been a while since I've looked at it, but I don't think it mandates that the construction has to be completed and for that number. Instead, it says this money must be used and is earmarked only for that project. And so if you fall short in terms of funding, you have to use other money. That doesn't offend the ballot question. If you can't finish the project with that money, but you still spend it on that project, that's consistent with the ballot question.
Thank you.
And I guess, Zach, if I could also add, Mr. Urban, if I could also add, is that the $7 million, because our $7 million is being spent on all environmental design and right-of-way, and we're getting all the design for the entire corridor and the right-of-way for the entire corridor, we're actually spending the $7 million on the entire corridor. We're not going to be able to build the entire corridor with what's left of all of our other federal and CDOT funding, but the $7 million that is from 2E is actually going to be spent on the entire corridor, if that helps with that thought in your mind.
Thank you.
Mr. Miller, did I see your hand up?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to reiterate what Mark Westbrook said about the design would qualify as far as appropriate use of bond funding. I'd also like to share with council, I have a little bit of experience working in project controls in Denver. It's not unusual for projects to cost overrun. Unfortunately, I like to call it a ready, fire, aim kind of approach to budgeting. Unfortunately, projects need to be budgeted before they're designed and constructed. We haven't even gone out for bid on this yet, by the way. So we don't even know if the budget that we have will be sufficient. There's always this kind of true-up game that any municipality has to take in order to make these projects fit within their budget. I think what the city is doing here to try to phase the project and to reduce the scope to fit within the existing budget is very appropriate. I would like to know when they think they might be able to finish the rest of the project, but as far as being prudent and approaching this financially, it seems like a good approach to phasing the project.
Additional discussion on this item. Ms. Dozman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So my question is directed at staff. Do you anticipate or project construction costs to continue to inflate, and are you taking that into consideration if we're going to do like a phase approach?
Yeah, it's a good question, Ms. Dozman. And you know, the first phase, as we mentioned, we're hoping to go out to bid here very soon in the next month or two. So, you know, the first phase cost should be fairly close. But yeah, it depends on how long the second phase comes. I think we're going to have to anticipate potential changes in costs, hopefully go down, actually. I mean, there's a possibility construction costs could go down, and we'd hope they would. They're at a high premium right now with labor and materials, but I don't know if Ken have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I guess just a note of caution. You know, we have been, you know, communicating with the construction industry through our consultants, and, you know, wondering if the, you know, the COVID situation and budget shortfalls for some governmental bodies to build stuff like this might be softening the construction cost industry. We'd like to think that would be the case. We haven't really seen that definitively yet, based on what we've heard from those inquiries.
Thank you. Additional discussion, Ms. Hoppy.
I just want to say thank you to staff for bringing this to us for an update, and I appreciate. I know that this has been a project long game. I also appreciate Treasurer Miller's ready, fire, aim, because it does definitely puts perspective on it. It's hard. Construction is hard to understand, that, you know, you do have to, like, the phases before you can even get anything done end up sometimes getting you down the road where it ends up costing you more money. And I just so very much look forward to having a street that people can cross safely, and that when it snows, they're not walking in the street because there's no sidewalk, the accessibility for our community. And I really look forward to this project being completed. I know it's a ways down the road, but I just appreciate your efforts to keep the train on the tracks. And so, you know, thank you for that.
Wasn't sure we had a railroad going down there, but let's stay on track. Mm-hmm. Additional discussion. Mr. Miller.
Yes, my question was, what is the time frame to finish the additional phases? Any idea of when that could happen?
We don't at this time. As I mentioned, you know, there are a couple of potential funding sources, you know, shorter term that we will be pursuing. You know, we had meetings obviously recently with Dr. Cog and CDOT. They did not tell us that they had $14.4 million sitting on the sideline that they wanted to, but they may. I mean, there may be other projects that aren't able to get built because other jurisdictions don't have their local match. There's some of those options. So we're exploring a couple different options, but it'd be inappropriate of me to promise beyond that as to when we think we'd have that full amount for that next phase. And there may be some interim phases that would be logical as well, and we'll explore those as well.
Thank you. Additional discussion on item 2A. We've got another half of this item to go, so.
Councilmember Hulteen's had her hand up for a while.
Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Hulteen, excuse me.
Right, sometimes it's hard to be seen in Hollywood squares, so I understand that. So this, I mean, a lot of this project is in the district that I spent this time last year walking through, and really repeatedly it came up again and again that the fact that the street does not serve to move cars or people who aren't in cars is a major concern of the constituents I talk to. It creates a lot of cut through traffic in the neighborhoods from people trying to avoid the traffic. Businesses are really concerned that the traffic backup really prevents people from accessing their businesses. And so I heard a lot of just a lot of support for getting it done. Nobody is looking forward to the process of the construction. I just have a couple of questions. I guess my first question, the map that you showed that had the sort of the southern stopping point at the McDonald's and Wendy's, have you looked at, instead of figuring out, how many, miles or feet of road you can complete, have you looked at phasing in terms of features and really doing like the road construction and then the second phase being some of the additional features? I don't like asking that question because the additional features are the things I really care a lot about, but there's a lot of, outside the curb improvements. I do have some concerns about what it's going to look like to go through all that construction and then have traffic go down to 2 lanes right before that intersection and come back out. So I'm just wondering if there's a different way of looking at the phasing that at least gets that that functionality done, so that we aren't going through a construction project and then left with a street that still isn't quite functioning in our community. That might motivate us even more to get that second phase funded. But I'm just curious if that was considered.
It was. We looked at a host of possibilities of what our options could be: building north, building south, building just a street, doing all the sidewalk. We looked at all those things, and the way our grants are done is on the 2014 grant that we got. Ken mentioned that we scored really well. We were the highest scoring capacity project on that grant. We were also the most expensive on that grant, and one of the reasons we got a lot of those scores is because of all the stuff behind the curb that we were doing to make this a multimodal street. So if we start trimming off sidewalks wholeheartedly, we start losing points in that grant. And with the Dr. Cog grant, we're gonna be meeting with them after this meeting to talk about where we are with our points and everything else with the scope of work we've got. Most of the things that we've got in that scope of work, it does talk about 35th to I-70, but it's sort of whole scale through that area that we got points for. And so by doing the sidewalks and all the stuff behind the curb, we'll likely retain the vast majority, if not all of the points that we got for that. And that was, I'm trying to remember from 6 years ago, that was like a third of our points was all the stuff behind the curb. So it's really important that we keep those elements in the part that we do build. And part of the benefit of building the northern portion is that that's the portion that's most efficient in all the stuff behind the curb. The corners from 35th to 38th already built sidewalk and streetscape on that stretch. We were going to rebuild the landscaping, but leave the sidewalk in place. And as I mentioned, from 38th up to around McDonald's or so, there's already sidewalk in front of the Safeway Shopping Center, the Wheat Ridge Marketplace. It's not as wide as what we plan to build, and the streetscape is just grass pretty much only, but it's still there. There's something there that people can still use. And so by building from like McDonald's Wendy from 41st North, we get to fix the vast majority of the stuff behind the curb. The only place it'll really be deficient will be from 35th to 38th still. That's still going to be a problem of it's not going to have any sidewalk. It's pretty much just got dirt path down there, but that's where our pedestrian traffic today is also the lowest. So we're trying to target all of that. And in my years of driving Wadsworth, because I've lived north of there for a long time, I now live south, thankfully, but I've lived north of there for a long time. So I drove Wadsworth 4 times a day for like 10 years. And it's pretty much that 44th Avenue intersection and the capacity getting up to the ramp to get on I-70 that a lot of our traffic issues. Certainly 38th Avenue has traffic issues. 38th definitely needs the CFI with that extra capacity that intersection gives it. But if I had to pick one of the two, I'd like to fix 44th first because it fixes a lot of the problems we have up at that north end and getting that capacity. The other thing too is that, again, because of what's there today, from 38th up to 44th, we have a third lane going north. It's an auxiliary lane, it's a turn lane to get to those businesses, but we can convert that auxiliary lane from 38th north into a third lane. So really the only place going north we don't end up with a third lane is from 35th to 38th. And for a lot of what's down south also on southbound traffic, there's a little bit of a bump out there at 38th and 44th, but we've got the opportunity there to, can you guys still hear me? Because I'm getting messages.
Yes, now we hear you.
I got a message that I've been muted by the host, so I'm not sure what's going on there. I'm being told to shut up maybe. We've almost got a third lane going all the way south to 35th. So from a capacity standpoint, we end up with 3 lanes of traffic through most of this corridor. We just don't get that extra capacity that we'd like to see at the 38th Avenue intersection. And we definitely want to get that still. So if there's a federal stimulus package that comes out that's got infrastructure funding available, we will have a shovel-ready project that we can apply for. There used to be a grant called Tiger Grant. The Trump administration called it Build. We've made a run at that grant twice with Wadsworth, but we've never been shovel-ready before, so we've not scored real well. So we'd have a shovel-ready project to try to go after some funding there too. So we don't know when we'll get the money for this second phase of this project to build essentially the 30th Avenue intersection the way it wants to be built. But we're going to keep our nose to the ground and keep listening for opportunities to get that extra $14 million.
Okay, thank you. And then my second question is for Patrick. So Patrick, when do the 2E funds sunset, and is there any alignment between the sunsetting of those funds and the opportunity maybe to look at additional funding sources through putting those type of funds back up on the ballot for infrastructure projects?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Councilmember Holteen. Those are a couple of different options we've been looking at, not just for the Wadsworth project, but just for any financing that we may need in the future for other projects. We have a lot going on in the city right now, and cash flow sometimes becomes an issue. But the bonds expire after we raise $38.5 million or 12 years, whatever comes first. Right now, based on revenue projections, we're thinking they're probably going to expire in 8 years, and they started in 2017. So, but those projections don't include anything from the Clear Creek Crossing project, any revenues from there. So if that project gets kicked off in the next couple of years and we're starting to generate more revenues there, that could take another year off potentially. So let's see, 17 and 20. So maybe in 2025-ish, they could expire. We did have a meeting with our financial advisors who helped us with the initial bond offering to see if there was any current options for additional revenues. Interest rates have decreased substantially since we issued those bonds in 2017. So they did an analysis to see if we had any bond capacity left. And unfortunately, we don't have much, only about $500,000. And it would probably cost us about $50,000 or so to even do a bank loan for that. So, there's a potential for $500,000 there. We also have gained interest on our bonds of about $2 million. I think we'll have once all the other projects are done and the bonds are paid off. So we can use that interest. That interest could go towards this project also. And I think your original question though was, could we issue more bonds? And that could be an option. Obviously, it would take a vote of the citizens, but and you could do that before the bonds expire too. But not sure if that would get much support while we have outstanding bonds. So, did that answer your question?
Yeah, it did. Thank you very much.
Additional discussion. Mr. Urban.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So under the EA, we had the final design, as it were, and then it went through that value engineering process. And so if we're only going to do a first phase of the project, would it be prudent to do the full boat, the full design as it was initially decided, and eliminate those value engineering elements, or just keep the value engineering changes in the design?
So the final EA was actually based on that value engineering version. So the impacts that we've got on historical properties, the impacts we've got on everything else is based on that value engineering thing. The value engineering was done in 2018. We didn't finalize the environmental process until later in 2019. And so what we've got on the plans right now is in alignment with what's in the EA right now. And it's not at all unusual for EAs to be done for full project, and then you've got a funding situation. You build a phase one, and then you basically, the EA stays alive for a period of time, and if it's you will likely, if there's some passage of time, if it's 5 years later or something, you'll probably have to do a reevaluation. We did that at Clear Creek Crossing, if you guys will remember, those of you that were on council when that was kicked back in again. We had to do a reevaluation of the EA to say that, hey, all the work we did back in the mid 2000s is still valid in the mid 2010s. So there's a chance we'll have to do a reevaluation. Certainly, the quicker we can get to this project with funding, the less of a reevaluation that has to be. But we don't have to go back and reinvent the wheel. The EA will still be active and in force, and potentially have to look at some other properties that might now be deemed historic because it's been 5 years and it's old enough those properties now slip in. But I don't think that'll be the case. Everything we've got in the sort of the southern portion really doesn't fit into that category very well. So I think that there's a very low risk of our EA, somehow expiring or going cold on us, or having to do a massive reevaluation of that.
I guess I remember reading somewhere that the EA has like a 10-year shelf life, or at least the PEL has a 10-year shelf life. And this breaking up of the project into two phases, does that need to be cleared by CDOT or FHWA, or what's their involvement in this phased approach?
We've already reached out to them. We wanted to know that it was a doable thing before we came to council and talked to you guys about it. And both CDOT and FHWA have signed off on the phased approach, that they're okay with what we're doing. The one thing is Ken alluded to is, we've got $45 million identified now, and what we're showing as our budget is 43 is some of that overlay work and some of that safety program work, because we're not building the southern third of this project. They might take back some of that money, and my estimate based on just linear footage of projects is that they might take back around $1.8 to $1.9 million. We're gonna talk with them about that and try to keep as much of that as we can. But that's sort of our next step, is to get our funding nailed down to know exactly what we have budget-wise left, both with Dr. Cog and with CDOT. But FHWA has signed off on us doing a phase project. CDOT went to them with that.
Thank you. Additional discussion on this item? Okay. Should we move to item 2B?
Bear with me, I will start the slideshow back.
Okay, I'll bring it up so I can see it.
Ken, I think you'll need to go down and highlight the title slide for this next portion. Or I think we're there. Yep, so we're there.
So Mark and Greg are gonna walk us through kind of at a high level where we were at in the right-of-way acquisition status. So I'll follow your direction, Mark, in terms of going through slides.
It's not very often your director's your AV guy, just for the record.
It's not a good model, generally speaking.
So just again, we've got 4 new council people, and I know we've talked with you guys about right away on this project before, but just a brief history. We sort of started the right away process in late 2018 with awarding a contract to HDR. In 2014, we came to council to ask for authorization to acquire right away. We like to do that really early in the process, just so we've got that checked off. At that time, council did not give us the use of eminent domain authority. The city is the eminent domain authority to use on this project. In August 19th and in December of 2019, staff made a presentation with Greg's help, talking about the right-of-way acquisition process in detail, discussed using eminent domain, and really the second meeting was just because we had 4 new council people, so we wanted to make sure that they knew all the same things that the original 4 council people knew. So that was the reason for those 2 meetings, just to talk through the process. And then we're gonna let Greg talk about this slide, because this is what he does every day, day in and day out for years and years and years. So he's going to walk through. This is just a real synopsis, a summary of what was in the packet and what was discussed at the study sessions.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks, Mayor and Council. We've been through this a couple of times, but we start the right-of-way acquisition process with a notice of intent. It's the formal notice advising the landowners that the city is starting the acquisition process. And if the value of the acquisition exceeds $5,000, the notice includes a notification of the landowner's right to get it appraised. And if the appraisal meets certain criteria, then the city will pay for the appraisal, and that's a state law. So then we enter into the appraisal stage, and the city gets their appraisal. In most cases on this project, the landowners have gotten their own appraisals, which they should do. That's a state law that they should take advantage of. That gives them a valuation expert to advise them, so that they're more of a equal party at the bargaining table. And as indicated, they finish the appraisal, and if it meets certain criteria, the city agrees to pay for that appraisal. Then a CDOT review appraiser looks at both appraisals and makes a determination as to which appraisal best reflects fair market value and damages to the remainder, if any, and which has been prepared and accepted with acceptable appraisal practices. And the CDOT appraisal review process is a pretty rigorous process. I mean, they read the appraisals, they go out and look at the sales. As to, they have a conversation with the city's appraisers. If they find that some things need to be changed, they'll try to get the city's appraiser to make those changes, and most will do that. But at the end of the day, they decide which one best it should be the basis for the offer, and that's determined, and that's the offer. On this project, the CDOT review appraiser did pick the landowner's appraisal as the basis for the offer in one instance. There was another instance where the city's value was like I think twice what the landowner's value was, but CDOT chose the higher value as the basis for the offer. So then our real estate specialists make the offers, meet with the owners. There's a back and forth, hopefully a very constructive period. In this project, we included incentives, which is if the landowners accepted the offer that was presented within 30 days, an additional bonus was paid. That was a very effective means of getting agreements, and even when agreements were not able to be obtained, both the city and the landowner were motivated to try to, get the negotiation to a consensual agreement within a short period of time. So that's been a very successful program. Every time a landowner submits a counteroffer, it's tendered to Mark for consideration. We'll make a recommendation on that, and the city very seriously considers all counteroffers that have been proposed by the landowners. Hopefully at this point, you've gotten most of your agreements. There is always a few that you're unable to get an agreement with. The next step in the process there is to issue a final written offer. Usually the final written offer is at the amount of the fair market value. And it's a final written offer that says, here's this offer, you have 14 days to accept this. If it's not accepted, then the city may have a conversation or may request eminent domain authority. And then the last step in the process is if the final offer doesn't yield a negotiation, and sometimes when we send final offers, it does change the negotiation and lead to some settlements, and that's been the case on this project. Then we send a last and final offer at a higher amount than the FMV. And the last and final offer, when this was developed initially, was there's a state statute that says if you were to ever file eminent domain and go all the way to a valuation trial, and the award at the valuation trial was more than 130% of the last offer, then the condemning authority needs to pay the landowner's attorney's fees. Otherwise, the landowner pays their own attorney's fees. So usually the purpose of a last and final offer is to get an offer in front of the landowner high enough to try and protect the city from attorney's fees. But, in my experience, I've found that when last and final offers are tendered, a lot of times they are accepted by landowners, or they lead to kind of re-energizing the negotiation and get to settlement. And right now we're on a final offer stage with some of the folks, and a last and final offer stage with some others. We're starting to see a little bit of movement on some of these, which is typical, and we're hoping that these can move some of these off the dime closer towards resolution. So current state, there's 3 full acquisitions. One is closed. One has an agreement is set for closing. And then Mark and I have come up with some categories for those that we don't have deals with. And we have an impasse, which is, it looks like we're in an impasse. We're going to be unable to solve the acquisition. Difficult, meaning it's not looking very promising, but there might be a chance. Worried is, we're having some back and forth, but we don't know if it's going to work out. And then, promising, and then we have some that we've just started on, so it's kind of too early to tell. But one of the full acquisitions is in the worried category. We're just separated by large numbers currently. As to the partial acquisitions, we've got 62 partial acquisitions. I think the number is actually 65, but we've got 23 closed and 13 under agreement heading towards closing. So that's 36 that are signed up or closed, 11 that are promising. A lot of the promising, we have verbal agreements, and we're just reducing them to written agreements. So, the 36 plus the 11 is 47 that are trending very well. We have 5 that we can't tell yet, and 2 offers that we are going to be making in the near future. And then kind of the areas of concern, we have 4 that we're worried about, 3 difficult, and 4 at an impasse. So, 47 trending well, 7 too early to tell, and 11, I guess, trending poorly at this point.
Sorry, I started talking. The right-of-way funding, we've projected that at $16.4 million total. As I mentioned, $4.4 million of that is for the 3 full acquisitions. We'll hopefully be able to sell those 3 properties and recoup some of those costs. We don't know how much. We're sort of guessing maybe 50%, but we don't know that for sure yet. We've got $10.2 million in the partial acquisitions. There's just some other right-of-way costs that are at $0.4 million. That includes things like relocations and paying appraisals and all that stuff. And then $1.4 million is the contract that we currently have with HDR for the right-of-way consultant. So the valuation gaps we have right now on the 11 properties we have, we've got over $1.5 million in gap right now between what we think, what we're currently negotiating at, and what the landowner's currently negotiating at. I mentioned 10 properties because right now we got one landowner who's just sort of not negotiating. They're not giving us a counter offer yet. The rest all have. But of those 10 properties, if you look at where they're at and where we're at, they're 44% over what the experts thought those properties, our experts thought those properties were worth. The worried property is over $500,000. The difficults, that number, one of the properties moved from difficult to impasse, and we sort of shifted some things around, but we're like 58 grand there. And then the impasse property is the one that we think we're just stuck at right now today, where they've said thanks, but no thanks to your offer. And we've sort of said the same to them, is almost $1 million. So these are significant numbers. When you look at the total of the acquisition cost is somewhere around $15 million. If you take away the right-of-way consultant, this is 10% of the total acquisition budget is our gap right now. So this is, in staff's opinion, we just can't write a check for $1.5 million, extra $1.5 million at this point, because that's $1.5 million we won't have available for construction, which puts us in even more trouble on the construction side. So the schedule we've got on this is we're scheduled to come see you on October 12th, but we didn't want to come see you cold. We wanted to have this conversation first. The public portion of this was just so that everyone that's watching knows where we are with the process and what's going on, and why we're coming to council on October 12th to request authorization to use eminent domain. And what we'll be requesting for is these 11 properties that we've got in the worried difficult impasse, concerned that all of them might become impasse before October 12th. Certainly, if any of those drop off the list, great. If we get a deal with some of those folks before the 12th, that'll be great. And maybe we'll get a deal on Tuesday the 13th, and we won't use the authority on that property. But right now, we're concerned that these properties are at the point that we need to request eminent domain authority on those. The reason for October 12th is on the October 21st Dr. Cog board meeting, we've got to go explain why we're getting our second strike. So we had originally told Dr. Cog that we would go out to bid before October 1st of 2019. And that was our hope. Our hope was actually go out to bid before in January 2019, back in 2015. We thought that, but the environmental process delayed us 2 months. So we had to meet with Dr. Cog's staff on our first strike last year and explain why we weren't meeting the October 1st deadline, and our reasons were valid. And so they said, okay, we're going to award you your first strike. And Mr. Johnstone mentioned earlier about 3 strikes. That was the old policy. The new policy is 2 strikes. You get 2 strikes and you're out. So we're not going to be out to bid by October 1st, which is in like a week, believe it or not. And so we're getting our second strike. So we'll show up at the Dr. Cog board meeting and explain that the vast majority of our delay was due to environmental delays. Earlier this year, in January, February, we were still projected to try to go out to bid by October 1st. But then, of course, COVID-19 hit. And we have had some legitimate delays due to COVID-19. Some of the CDOT processes, and not dinging CDOT at all, it affected them pretty hard, have taken twice as long as we thought they would. Their staff's having to adjust to reviewing a 600 plus set of plans on a laptop at home instead of being able to print out sheets and compare things back and forth and do all that. So it's been really challenging. And then there's been some delays in the right-of-way acquisition process also due to just getting the number of appraisals that we've got through the CDOT reviewers. They had some staff changes, and so we ended up with half the number of viewers they normally have, and they pulled some resources, and we're getting through that, but we're still there. We've got to discuss with Dr. Cog what our current status is. Hopefully by the 21st, we'll tell them design is 100% done. We're about to get clearances from CDOT for the whole project, and here's where we are on right-of-way. And hopefully by then our 11 promising will be done, and we'll have 2/3 or 3/4 of our right-of-way purchased. But if we don't have all the right-of-way purchased, we have to show them that we're committed to complete the project, especially the right-of-way acquisition. That generally becomes the critical path on these big projects, and becomes the things that delays and hold things up. Assuming they give us our second strike and say, you're okay, we're gonna let you keep the money. And with them, it's pretty much all or nothing. It's not like we're gonna give you 2/3 of the money because you're building 2/3 of the project. It's you keep the 25 million or you don't. And the most they'll give us, what Dr. Cog's staff has conveyed, is 120-day maximum extension. That gets us to the end of January from October 1st. Right now, we're projecting to go out to bid at the end of December. And so we've only got 1 month of float in our schedule available. And that's a really, really tight situation for us to be in, with us just not knowing what may happen this fall with COVID and everything else that's happening out there. So that's the reason we're coming to council on October 12th, is that That way I can go to Dr. Cog on the 21st and say, well, where are you on right away? I can say, well, we've purchased 2/3 of the properties. We've had 11 that are problematic, and council's given me the authority to use eminent domain, and we've filed for that on these 5 properties. So it shows our commitment to moving the project forward. If I go to them on the 21st and I don't have that authority, then they're going to question whether we're really committed to completing this project or not, because getting the right of way done is a critical portion of getting to the end of this project. And with that, we can talk about questions, discussions. Just as a reminder, this is our public portion of this conversation. We can talk about individual properties in more details during the executive session that comes up next. But if you've got any questions in general about the schedule, the process, or any of those kind of things you guys want to talk about, we certainly can do that right now.
Okay, thank you very much. We will open it up for questions. Mr. Urban.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. With respect to the right-of-way acquisition properties, how many of those are south of 41st or the terminus of phase 1?
I don't know the exact number. It's less than 1/3 because on the east side, which we've already got, which is the Wheat Ridge Marketplace, we've already got that acquisition completed, or at least the agreement done. It's mostly easement there because they already had a lot of right-of-way. And then on the west side, everything from 35th to 38th was one big property. So we have a handful of properties on the east side that we've got to get, and we've gotten agreements on most of those. And then we have
Mark,
a
we have
handful of properties on the west side that we need to get also.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but Mr. Urban, we have a map that will show you in executive session that shows you exactly where the properties are. So you'll get more details then.
Thank you. I guess I would just say that as it relates to eminent domain, I would like to focus more on the right-of-way acquisitions in the first phase, but I can discuss that in detail later.
Yeah, I think the map will clear that up.
Ms. Hulteen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This question is actually for Greg. In your experience, how does authorization of eminent domain impact the negotiations? Do you find that once that's in place, that property owners get more cooperative, less cooperative? Does it help cut off the need to really take things any further? I'd just be curious how that impacts negotiations.
In my experience, I don't know that authorizing eminent domain per se changes things, but if eminent domain is available and it's used and an eminent domain action is filed, then that does change the dynamic of the negotiation. And historically, I had a past life at CDOT. Historically, we were able to consensually agree to 80% of our acquisitions, 20% we would file eminent domain actions on, but of those 20%, 99% settled as soon as, shortly thereafter or along the way, and very few of those went all the way to kind of hearings and litigation. So it's something to be avoided for sure, but and we want to try to avoid it at all costs. But when you have difficult ones that are at the negotiations at an impasse, you've always got to have a plan B, and if that's your plan B, then you're going to be able to clear the parcels and clear the project for construction. So but the act of passing an eminent domain resolution, I don't know that necessarily has changed things. And if you pass the eminent domain resolution, it doesn't mean that we're going to move into eminent domain, but it just means that if we continue to be at impasse and time gets short and we can't solve it, then that's a step that's available to be able to be taken.
Thank you.
Additional discussion. Ms. Hoppy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I just kind of wanted to remind everybody that, we had property owner ask us to threaten eminent domain because it has a tax advantage for them to be able to not have to spend that money for a pretty significant amount of time. I think it changes it from 1 year to like 3. So, you know, if I were one of the properties that we're selling right now, I would almost be asking for that because I wouldn't want to have to turn that money around right away. But so it does have a tax advantage, and that may be something that some of the properties are considering why they're waiting.
Thank you. Additional discussion? Okay, I know we've got, we're going to have more of this in our other executive session. Mr. Urban.
My question is relating to if we were to acquire a property and then subsequently not put it to public use, would we be able to abandon that? Or would that, we'd have to sell it back to the previous owner? Or how long do we have to change our mind once we go through the eminent domain process?
Mr. Jameson might want to comment, but the eminent domain requires that you have a good faith reason to need it for a public purpose. Once you've acquired it, you do need to use it for a public purpose. But if it turns out that you ended up not needing it because it was excess, you are not required to sell it back to or reconvey to the owner, and you can dispose of it. And the rules for disposal of property by the city are governed by the charter. This would not be designated parkland, so it would require an ordinance, I think, from the council, but not a unanimous ordinance to dispose of it. And the council over the years has had a few odds and ends of property that it has had to dispose of. But as long as you had a good faith reason to acquire it in the first place, which you do in all of these particular cases, and then you ended up because of a design reconfiguration, you're probably thinking of not needing it, then if there was not a need for it, maybe an expanded tree line or something, or all or a part of it might end up really being just a part, then you can convey it, but you're not obliged to convey it back to the original owner.
I had a question. What impact would would eminent domain have on our timetable and the scheduling in the process?
Well, obviously, if you were to be required to go through the entire process of either a commission evaluating the property and having a trial in front of the commission or a judge trial, that will extend the time frame for acquisition, although it is common, as Greg probably will be able to tell you, that once you've filed, you can also ask for what's called immediate possession, which means that you've got the right to use the property right away, and the only thing that's left to debate in front of the court is valuation. So you're allowed to go on and actually start doing things. So it would not materially slow down the project. It would take longer to figure out how much you're going to have to pay for that property, but you'd have control over it whenever you actually needed to have that control.
And Mayor, if I may add to that, your best case scenario for your contractor is when they're out on the project, all of the properties are available for them for construction, for efficiency. And so with this schedule, with advertising by the end of the calendar year, and starting construction in the spring, if we had some outliers and were authorized for eminent domain, if they were filed and we had this immediate possession hearing that Mr. Dahl speaks of, there would be time in between advertisement and the notice to proceed to conduct those hearings so that the contractor would have those properties available for construction. So it's getting to the point in the process where if we can't solve some of these, we really need to think about, this plan B, this next step, because it's going to be important in protecting the project schedule. Absent that, it'll be difficult to protect the project schedule.
And Mr. Johnstone and Mr. Westberg, how do we have good confidence in your construction numbers? I say that with not tongue in cheek, but I know it's a difficult quantity to put your pencil on. But have we have your engineers built in some contingencies in their budgeting on this, that we think we've got realistic numbers?
Yeah, the numbers that HDR put together, this latest cost estimate, was done this spring with finalized basically in July. And so that was with starting to see the impacts of what COVID-19's done and what the impacts of things are done. Denver is just a really popular place to build right now. The Central 70 project, all these things have just done that with a cost. So the cost that they're using is not, some database I've got for our little local city projects. It's the CDOT database. It's what's trending nationally. It's all those kind of things. And that's why I think we saw such a huge jump from the $45 million number we thought we had at the end of 2018 or sometime in 18 to today. In doing a cost assessment on a project like this is a pretty intensive effort, which is why we just don't do one every month. We last updated it, in sometime in 18 when we were doing the value engineering process, and then we updated it again this year, and that's when we've noticed this big spike. And I think that big spike just reflects the construction industry in the metro area that's changed over the last 2 years. That we've continued to see big increases in numbers and that kind of thing. So if we can get out to bid in December, then we feel pretty comfortable with our numbers. We've got some contingency built into that. Of course, we've got like a 10% contingency built into that number. And as I mentioned, we've got a little bit of extra funding in our budget right now. If we sell the full acquisitions, while the project is still going on, we got that funding available to help to backfill if we end up going over a little bit and stuff. So we feel pretty comfortable with our 21.5 is our number that we're shooting for, and we hope to be able to deliver from Wendy's, McDonald's north for that 21.5. So we're certainly going to do everything we can to make that happen.
Thank you. All right, additional discussion, questions on this item? Mr. Urban.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On that $1.56 million gap between our valuation and their valuation, is that based on differing appraisals for those amounts, or that's what the property owner has indicated they would like as an offer?
Typically, that's based on the appraisals that they've obtained and the numbers that they think they've got. Their appraisals, and again, to talk in general terms, we can talk more specifics in the next session, but in general terms, their appraisals have come in at 2 to 3 times ours often, on several occasions. And one of the impasse properties is they're at like 3 times what our appraisal was, or even 4 times what our appraisal was. Landowners' appraisals on these things tend to come up with damage numbers that are very high and are based on things that aren't always necessarily allowed, and it's their right to do that. It's what they do. They're trying to negotiate in the best interest of their client, so I don't fault them for that. But most of those appraisals that came in much higher than ours were not accepted by CDOT. They sort of have 3 categories. There's accepted, meaning this was done right. You ought to consider the numbers here. The recommended is the one that's picked for the value of the prop for the FMV. And then the ones that are not accepted, they'll generally have a little write-up that it's not accepted for these reasons. And so in all those cases where we've got landowner appraisals and they're represented by attorneys, and those appraisals were not accepted by CDOT reviewer as being a valid fair market value for that property. Now, that being said, we've still used the data in those appraisals if we've made responding offers or counters offers. We've often said, well, we get it. There's some damages here. We'll give you some of that money, and what do you think of that? And sometimes that ends in a deal. We've got a bunch of properties we've made deals on doing that approach. On the ones that are on the list right now, we're struggling to get there.
So on the new budget for the phase 1, that 1.56 million, that's not a number that's included in that, or what is the difference between that 1.56 million and what we're anticipating in the phase 1 budget for right-of-way acquisition?
I think that question is probably better answered in the next session.
Okay, and then I guess, my line of logic on that is if we met them in the middle at 780,000, would that 780,000 be an amount that would be in addition to the phase 1 budget or inclusive of the phase 1 budget?
Yeah, again, I think probably talk about that in the next session.
Okay, thank you.
I just don't want to talk about something that might harm our ability to negotiate on the city's behalf.
Okay. Any further discussion on this item at this point? Okay, thank you very much for bringing that to us. We have some work to do there. That takes care of our 2 agenda items on this on our study session. I will go now to item number 3, staff reports. Mr. Hoff.
Nothing this evening.
Okay, thank you. We will go to elected officials reports. Do we have a report from any members of council? Ms. Hoppy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to say thank you to all of the citizens that went out and helped this weekend on the corners of I-70 and Kipling to clean that up. Our county treasurer, Jerry Tulio, organized that. Joe DeMott was there. Morgan Richards and her family, John Marriott, lots of other volunteers. We had staff, Patrick, Karen, Dolan. We had officers there. Mr. Starker was there. Is that, yep, great.
Yeah.
Yep, awesome. I just dropped off Gatorades because I had to go to 2 lacrosse games that day. So I dropped off Gatorades in the morning and then went to go be a lacrosse mom. But I just want to say thank you to everybody who did that. Area looks so much nicer, and there are a lot of citizens that appreciate that. So thank you so much for all of your guys' work on that corner. So thanks.
Well, I'm sorry I missed the Gatorade.
I didn't see it either, Mayor.
Maybe we had our heads down. Ms. Nosler-Beck.
I wanted to give a special showed up to speak tonight. We had some young people share some really personal stories, and it took a lot of courage to stand up and share that with all of us. So just want to recognize that and thank them for bringing their perspective. Thank you.
Okay, any other elected officials matters that you'd like to bring forward today? Mr. Kirkpatrick.
I have 3 quick items. As everyone here is aware, but some of the members of the public who may be listening are not, today I issued a certificate of sufficiency to the petitioners who would like to reverse the council's decision to change the zoning at 38th and Johnson. They needed 1,757 signatures, and they were well over that number by almost 500. Any registered elector can now file a protest to that petition until the 6th of October. Assuming no one does, then we will come to you on the 12th of October with specific actions for you, specific motions for you to consider, which of course would be either to repeal the ordinance or to set a date and time for a special meeting. There are literally too many variables in the air for me to even speculate on what exact date that meeting might be recommended. I can tell you that it will be after the first of the year, because for instance, once we have a ballot that's ready to go, we are required to mail that ballot to all military members and foreign service members overseas 45 days before election day. There is no wiggle room on that. I could go on with the details, but please be patient, and I will tell you that once we have it, what the further details are. Mr. Stice, you have a question for me?
Because this is going to be or if this were to move forward and be a special election, is it possible that we can put other questions on that ballot?
I would defer to Mr. Dahl on that. I don't know. Jerry?
Sure. I mean, council has an independent ability to call a special election really at any time. There's a lot of date restrictions, as was mentioned in the statute, before and after a regular election and other things. But you know, the law allows you to set a special election on other items that you want to refer to. So yes.
Is there a process that we need to follow other than voting to do that, or is there anything that involves the citizens or anything like that?
Kind of depends upon the topic there would be the ballot question. Generally, no. I mean, it's a pretty straightforward process. The best answer I think I can give you without, you know, asking, well, what topics would be something that if you brought it up at a study session, we'd be able to kind of parse through that and figure out if there are any particular additional constraints other than, say, for an example, a referred question on whether or not to designate a park for a new purpose or to rename a park or something that while you could maybe do that as council, you'd like to have the electors say as to that. And that would be different, for example, than say some kind of Tabor question that obviously would be special election and have to be during a Tabor time. It's hard for me to speculate other than to say it was raised at a study session. I'd be able to then figure out, okay, if it's that topic, here's the time frame.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Urban, did you have another question?
I was gonna say that Mr. Stites took the question out of my mouth, and I was also interested in that. Don't necessarily have a topic at hand, but since we're paying for an election, we might as well get our money's worth.
Absolutely. I know it's late. I'll be very brief about the general election. Please tell people who have registered but have moved, they must change their registration or their ballot will go to the wrong address in the mail. So if someone said, you ask someone, are they registered? Make sure that you tell them to update the registration if they have moved. Friday, October 9th, which believe it or not, is only 18 days away. Jefferson County elections folks will drop our general election ballots in the mail. If you have not received it by the 19th, then it's time to start calling the clerk and recorder's office to find out where your ballot is. The last day they recommend you mail them back is October 26th. That is sooner than some previous years because of potential delays in the mail, whether that's really true or not. If anyone has any questions about any of that, of course, we're available to answer them. Finally, I would say if I am invited to attend any of the diversity, self-reflection, whatever training that we discussed earlier this evening, I would be happy to do that. I'm not expecting any other elected official necessarily would, but I would be glad to do it. So whoever's making that decision, please keep that in mind. Be well, be safe, wear your masks. If you can find it in Wheat Ridge, buy it here.
Thank you, Clerk Kirkpatrick. Any other elected officials matters to come before the council at this study session right now? Okay, we're gonna sign off. I want to thank Ms. Dozman and Ms. Nosler Beck for bringing the race and equity question before us, and I'd like to thank particularly all of the citizens that came and spoke tonight. Ms. Hoppy.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Can I interrupt Ms. Hoppy? She's about to make the executive session motion, I think.
Okay.
If I'm right. And I'd like to ask her to edit it just very slightly, referencing the charter section 5B1B. Ms. Hoppy, if you've got that there, add subsection D as well. So B and D.
We need to close the study session first and open the special meeting.
Oh, right,
I have to do the motion to go to the executive session first.
No, we need to open the special meeting first so you can do that.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah,
Okay,
actually,
sorry.
Patrick's right. You and I both jumped the gun, Ms. Hoppy. I feel awful.
Before we open the special meeting, we're going to close the study session. So we're almost about to close the study session. So if there's no more business to come before us in the study session, we will adjourn the study session. So we're at that. And now I will ask for a motion to go into executive session.
If you would please first, as pointed out by Mr. Goff, formally open the special meeting called for this evening.
Okay. I would like to, excuse me. I would like to open the city council or the special meeting of the city council for the city of Wheat Ridge, Colorado for September 20th, 2020. We have already had our citizens' right to speak on this at the beginning of our study session. I will ask if there is any member of the public who would like to speak at this time on any matter not on the agenda. I do not hear one, so we will close our citizens' right to speak, and we will go to our agenda item number 1, and I will yield the floor to Ms. Hoppy.
Point of personal privilege.
Yes.
Are we going to take roll or do the Pledge of Allegiance?
I would appreciate if you would either take roll or ask the clerk to take note of the attendees that are on the screen to demonstrate that we do in fact have the council present.
Good. All right. Will the clerk please call the roll? You're
unmute, Steve.
Yeah, you're on mute.
Unmute, Steve.
Sorry about that. I'm old and it's late. Ms. Hoppy.
Present.
Ms. Weaver.
Here.
Ms. Hutchinson.
Here.
Mr. Urban.
Present.
Ms. Saltine.
Present.
Mr. Stites.
Present.
Ms. Nosler-Beck.
Present.
Ms. Dozman.
Here.
Mr. Mayor, all 8 members of the council are present for this special meeting.
Thank you very much. Okay, now I would like to recognize Ms. Hoppy.
And
if that's the
Hoppy,
right.
If you would not mind, Ms. Hoppy, adding to your motion letter D under the charter 5B1BND. And also, I'd like to request that you add to the list of persons to attend the city treasurer. The city treasurer would like to be able to attend the meeting. I think I would be appreciative if he would be able to. Be very helpful.
Just real fast on the list of persons to attend, I believe that's under announcement number 1, which
no,
then
well, it's also in your motion.
Oh, yes, I see it. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, ready. I move to go into executive session for a conference with the city attorney, city manager, city treasurer, and appropriate staff and consultants under Charter Section 5.7 B1B and subsection D and CRS 24-6-402 4B to receive legal advice concerning consideration of legal action to pursue real properties through eminent domain for the Wadsworth Improvement Project. I further move to adjourn the city council meeting at the conclusion of the executive session.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, will the all in favor of the motion please raise your hand, and will the clerk please record the votes?
Mr. Mayor, the motion has passed 8-0.
Thank you.
Mayor,
yes.
Wanted before everybody logs off, make sure everybody has the link to the executive session. Does everybody have it still?
Yes. So we're going to log off of this, and we're going to dial back in, and there will be in about an 8-minute delay.
Okay.
So we will see you on the other Zoom call
Greg,
in about
Greg,
8 minutes.
Greg, you have the link?
I do. Yes. Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes.